of Ricky's willingness to re-enter the workforce. When I suggested he consider part-time work, Ricky brushed it off, deeming it unsuitable for his future aspirations. As time wears on, Ricky grows increasingly agitated whenever I broach the subject of his job search. While he may appear unperturbed, still receiving unemployment benefits, his prolonged unemployment leaves me on edge. Eventually, Ricky begins to make demands for money, hinting that his savings from his bachelor days have evaporated. Though I never knew the extent of his savings, his post-marriage spending habits seemed extravagant. Whether it was splurging on home gym equipment or indulging in the latest video games, it's evident that he wasn't prudent with his finances. Now, with his unemployment benefits exhausted, the financial burden falls squarely on my shoulders. In exchange for Ricky handling household chores, I've taken on the responsibility of covering most expenses, from rent and utilities to groceries and daily essentials, solely from my paycheck. However, I'm stretched thin, unable to provide any more financial support. Despite this, Ricky argues, I don't have a single dollar to my name. Can't you throw in a bonus every now and then? Ricky's request pushes me to my limit, and I retort sharply, I don't have an allowance either, and I simply can't afford to give more. I understand the urgency of finding a full-time job, but even a part-time job would suffice for now. We can't continue like this. Our disputes over finances have become all too common, yet they always reach a standstill. Eventually, Ricky begins receiving financial assistance from his parents, further straining my relationship with them. During a visit to his parents, my mother-in-law lectures, a wife should quietly support her husband, earn more, and allow my son his freedom. Such comments only deepen the chasm between me and Ricky's parents. One evening, Ricky surprises me with plans to dine out. Excitedly, he reveals reservations at a prestigious local restaurant, rumored to be a hidden gem. He gleefully mentions that he's booked a table for 4, including his parents. With caution, I inquire about the affordability of such a lavish restaurant. Ricky's gaze shifts momentarily before he begins to explain. To my surprise, he reveals that he had quietly taken on a part-time job. It's a brief daytime shift, and after our past disagreements about full-time employment, he struggled to find the right moment to tell me. As a gesture of apology and reconciliation, he arranged the dinner reservation at a nice restaurant. Touched by his sincerity, I accept his invitation wholeheartedly. Although I harbor numerous questions about his workplace and position, Ricky reassures me that we'll discuss it over dinner, opting to keep the details vague for the time being. Despite the lingering curiosity, the cheerful topic succeeds in lifting the weight of tension between us, if only temporarily. However, the true purpose behind the dinner becomes clear days later in a cozy private room at the restaurant, and an unexpected surge of anger grips me as I realize the reality of the situation. From the moment we set foot inside, there's an unsettling aura emanating from the restaurant staff, signaling that something is amiss. They appeared slightly taken aback by our arrival, exchanging murmurs before my mother-in-law took charge and led the way. Despite any underlying tension, I maintained a polite smile and assured them that everything was all right, urging them to proceed to our designated room. Once inside, seating arrangements were swiftly made, adhering to the family's customary positioning. I found myself, as usual, seated closest to the entrance. It seemed an unspoken tradition whether this meal was Ricky's attempt at reconciliation or not. Without protest, I took my place. As the first dish was presented, a subtle unease began to settle in the room. The waiter paused upon entering, a troubled expression flickering across his features. My mother-in-law, with an air of grace seldom seen, gestured towards my father-in-law, indicating his place first, followed by herself, then our son. I can hardly wait to see what delights await us, I remarked, a sense of relief washing over me. The waiter proceeded to serve each dish in the designated order, father-in-law, mother-in-law, Ricky, and then began to explain each course in detail. It wasn't until they reached Ricky's plate that the realization struck. My meal had yet to be served. Gathering my resolve, I waited until the waiter had finished his explanations before speaking up. Excuse me. My plate remained conspicuously empty as I sat there, staring at the glass of water placed before me, courtesy of my mother-in-law. Before I could voice my concern, the waiter attempted to intervene, his eyes widening with apparent discomfort. However, my mother-in-law swiftly intercepted, her laughter cutting through the air as she dismissed my predicament. "Oh, Flo, you never fail to astonish with your audacity. A daughter-in-law is but a stranger to the family, Is it not enough that you intrude upon our family dinner uninvited? Now you demand a meal? Water is more than adequate for a woman as impertinent and clueless as you. Besides, this is no ordinary water. It's from a prestigious establishment. You should consider it a privilege. While I had no qualms about abstaining from food to savor the flavors later, this treatment was beyond absurd. As my mother-in-law ushered the waiter towards the exit, she added insult to injury, instructing him to charge an exorbitant $1,000 for the water. Consider it a steal for the opportunity to drink water in such opulent surroundings, she quipped. Take your time. We won't be hurried. Rage surged within me, bubbling up from the depths of my being. Glancing at Ricky, I hoped for some form of support, but he remained indifferent, focused solely on his meal. My father-in-law mirrored this indifference, casually sipping his drink as though nothing had happened. It dawned on me that they had orchestrated this scenario from the outset, intending to leave me with the bill. I felt utterly defeated, realizing that Ricky's promise of treating me with his part-time earnings was merely a ploy to draw me into this humiliation. In my frustration, anger seemed futile. Fine, I relented, my voice heavy with resignation. I'll cover the cost of the water and depart. Enjoy your family time. With that, I exited the room to settle the bill, the echoes of their coarse laughter trailing behind me into the hallway. The attentive waiter noticed my departure and offered an alternative, mentioning that although the pre-ordered meal couldn't be served, other options were available. Grateful for his consideration, I declined, insisting on only paying for the water before making my swift exit. To my surprise, the waiter informed me that the water was complimentary. With a mixture of relief and indignation, I promptly left the restaurant behind. Witnessing Ricky's behavior today was the final confirmation I needed to proceed with divorce proceedings. His prolonged unemployment, coupled with a lack of effort in job hunting, had strained our relationship to its breaking point. Instead of taking responsibility, he chose to conspire with his parents, shifting the blame onto me when the financial reality hit home. Today's ordeal of humiliation and harassment was the ultimate betrayal, extinguishing any lingering affection I had for him. It was clear that I could no longer endure this marriage. Upon returning home, I wasted no time in packing my belongings, determined to leave behind any remnants of my life with Ricky. Our once shared space now felt suffocating, overrun by his hobbies and possessions. As I reflected on our situation, I realized that my personal belongings were minimal, having prioritized saving since Ricky's business downfall cast a shadow over our finances. With a sense of purpose, I lugged my trusty suitcase from my college days, filled it with essentials, and set off for the hotel where I would spend the night, a temporary refuge as I embarked on my journey towards a fresh start. The following morning brought a newfound sense of vigor as I indulged in a hearty hotel breakfast before heading off to work. It had been an eternity since I'd relished such a meal. Typically, my breakfast consisted of nothing more than a plain slice of toast, devoid of jam or butter, due to my tight financial constraints. I marveled at the recent improvements in hotel services, appreciating the small luxuries amidst my mundane routine. En route to work, I made a brief stop at the city office to collect divorce papers from the after-hours window. Though only my portion had been filled out, an unexpected wave of optimism washed over me. With the decision to divorce now made, it became apparent that I had endured far more unhappiness in this marriage than I had initially realized. Upon arriving at the office and immersing myself in work, I couldn't help but notice a disturbance emanating from the neighboring department. As the clamor drew nearer, gradually encroaching upon our own workspace, I exchanged curious glances with a colleague seated beside me. Before long, the disruption reached our department, accompanied by a familiar voice calling out my name. "Hey Chloe, come out here. You can't just disappear because you didn't come home. Mom and Dad are willing to forgive you if you return and apologize." My heart raced as I stood up, utterly flabbergasted to see Ricky and my in-laws standing at the entrance of my office. Their hostile expressions only intensified upon locking eyes with me, and they wasted no time in making a beeline towards me. My mother-in-law thrust a receipt from the previous night's dinner into my hands. "I explicitly instructed you to pay $1,000 for that water, didn't I? You, the wife of my son, have orchestrated this deceit." Their accusations pierced through the air, disregarding the attention drawn from my colleagues. Ricky and my mother-in-law continued their tirade, their voices echoing through the office, while my father-in-law adopted his customary innocent bystander demeanor, just as he had the day before. The audacity of their actions left me speechless. It was incomprehensible that they would go to such lengths, even taking time off to confront me in my workplace. Yet no matter how forcefully they pushed, I remained resolute. If I'm deemed a stranger to your family, then why should I be held accountable for the meal? I retorted, my voice firm. I refuse to tolerate this harassment in my workplace. Should you persist in causing disruption, I will not hesitate to involve the authorities. A sudden sense of dread washed over me as I realized Ricky's intentions. Without warning, he seized a computer monitor from a nearby desk, his actions fueling my apprehension. Witnessing this escalation, my mother-in-law seized a nearby phone and declared, "We'll demonstrate the consequences of defying us," before violently slamming it onto the floor. The deafening crash reverberated through the room, triggering screams and pandemonium among the female staff, plunging the office into chaos. As panic ensued, my mother-in-law and Ricky, their faces flushed with anger, began hurling objects indiscriminately. Amidst the chaos, my father-in-law finally spoke, his tone laced with a strange detachment. If only Chlo had complied and paid as instructed, none of this would have transpired, he remarked apologetically, addressing the room. Please accept our apologies for the inconvenience. Chlo will take care of the cleanup. His attempt at humor fell flat, his nonchalant demeanor contrasting starkly with the mayhem unfolding before us. Gradually, people began to distance themselves from him, wary of any interaction. Feeling a surge of urgency, I knew I had to intervene. Amidst the chaos, I raised my voice, imploring Ricky and his cohorts to cease their destructive rampage. Yet, attempting to reason with individuals consumed by rage felt akin to conversing with an impenetrable barrier. Frantically, I reached out to grab Ricky's arm in a bid to make him listen, but before I could even make contact, the situation took a dramatic turn. Suddenly, the room was flooded with the presence of police officers, their arrival signaling a swift end to the turmoil. It appeared that someone from the adjacent department had alerted the authorities upon witnessing the mayhem unfold. Ricky's accusatory glare pierced through the chaos, his enraged voice cutting through the cacophony. "You called the cops," he bellowed before launching a punch towards me. In an instant, 3 officers swiftly intervened, swiftly restraining him and bringing him to the ground. It was a scene straight out of a television drama as they proceeded to arrest him on the spot for assault. Later that day, a surreal convergence occurred at the police station, where the company's CEO, myself, and Ricky's parents found ourselves gathered. The company promptly filed a report detailing the property damage incurred during the chaos. Seeking legal counsel regarding the harassment and tumultuous events, I faced the challenge of substantiating certain claims, particularly regarding the incidents at the restaurant and Ricky's financial negligence. After deliberation with my lawyer, it became apparent that pursuing legal action would be arduous and uncertain. Hence, the decision was made to pursue a settlement. Negotiations became complex once Ricky secured legal representation, but eventually we reached an agreement for a divorce devoid of asset division, coupled with compensation for the emotional distress inflicted by Ricky's workplace violence. Meanwhile, the assault case concluded swiftly, culminating in compensation for the injuries I sustained within 2 months. Regarding the damages incurred by the company, all legal battle seemed futile and potentially detrimental due to the risk of negative publicity. Thus, the company opted for an out-of-court settlement, prioritizing damage control over monetary gain, ultimately agreeing to a substantial settlement sum in lieu of legal action. In the aftermath, Ricky emerged as the sole individual burdened with a criminal record, while he and his parents found themselves saddled with a substantial debt owed to both me and the company. Struggling to fulfill their financial obligations, they resorted to tapping into their retirement funds, leaving them financially destitute. In a last-ditch effort to salvage Ricky's prospects, his parents orchestrated his return home and utilized their connections to secure him a position at another company. However, this newfound opportunity proved short-lived. Unbeknownst to them, Ricky's new employer maintained business ties with my company. Upon learning of Ricky's tumultuous history, exacerbated by rumors circulating about his volatile behavior, the company's CEO swiftly took action to protect their reputation, prompting Ricky to resign from his position. With little recourse, Ricky retreated back to his familial abode, abandoning his latest employment endeavor. As word of his criminal past began to circulate within the neighborhood, it eventually reached the workplace of my in-laws, further tarnishing their reputation. Now not only associated with harassment, they found themselves branded as individuals harboring a dangerous and destructive individual who had invaded their daughter-in-law's workplace. As the story spread from colleagues to higher-ups, the repercussions were swift and severe. Both of my in-laws were terminated from their positions despite being on the cusp of retirement. Facing the grim reality of unemployment, they sought legal assistance in a bid to rectify the situation. Conversely, I opted to forgo further legal action, realizing that I no longer needed additional reports and recognizing the futility of hastening into marriage. Fortunately, the pressure from my parents to tie the knot has ceased. It's possible they harbor a sense of remorse over the incident, as they've refrained from broaching the subject altogether. While I empathize with my parents' predicament, I can't help but feel relieved by the newfound freedom from matrimonial expectations. Instead, I've redirected my focus towards making amends and contributing positively to the company I inadvertently troubled. Immersed in new projects, I find myself experiencing the most fulfilling days of my life, embracing this newfound sense of purpose and fulfillment.
Hello there, my name's Sarah. I'm 27 and I've been working as a nurse for a while. My life has been a whirlwind of hospital shifts, patient checkups, and endless cups of coffee. The hospital corridors have been my world, and my social life? Well, that's been on life support for a while now. So, what's a girl to do when she's got no time to meet people the old-fashioned way? She goes online. I signed up for this dating site, nothing fancy, just one of those places where you hope to find someone who's not a complete weirdo. That's where I bumped into Ryan, virtually of course. His profile was plain, no show-off stuff. Just a guy with a genuine smile and a twinkle in his eyes. We started trading messages, and something clicked. We decided to meet up, see if this online chemistry had any basis in the real world. Our first date was at this cozy little cafe downtown. I walked in, and there he was, waiting for me. "Hey Sarah, you made it," he greeted, his face lighting up like a kid on Christmas morning. I was a bundle of nerves, but his easygoing nature calmed me down. We started chatting, just casual stuff at first. He was a software engineer, loved messing around with codes and all that. He was passionate about his work, but when he spoke about his mother, Margaret, his demeanor changed. "I'm all she's got, you know," he said, his voice dropping a bit. "My old man skipped out on us when I was just a kid. She's been alone since then. I try to help out, send her $1,000 every month. Ain't much, but it keeps her going." I admired his dedication, his sense of responsibility. I shared my own stories, about the grueling hours at the hospital, the emotional roller coaster that my job often was. He listened, really listened, not just nodding along. His eyes were full of understanding, and I felt a connection. As the weeks rolled by, I found myself falling for this guy. He was different, caring and attentive. He'd show up at the hospital when I was pulling late-night shifts, always with a hot meal in tow. He was a breath of fresh air in my otherwise monotonous life. One evening, while we were having dinner at his place, he looked at me, his eyes serious. "Sarah," he said, holding my hand across the table. "I've been doing some thinking. I really like you, more than just a girlfriend. I want us to be a team, you and me. What do you say, will you marry me?" His question caught me off guard. Sure, we hadn't been dating for too long, but there was no denying the love I felt for him. So, I said yes. We were over the moon, excited about our future together. But, boy, was I in for a ride. Little did I know that this decision would lead me down a path full of twists and turns. Life took a sudden turn after that dinner. I was now engaged to Ryan, a man I'd met online, who was as kind and caring as he was committed to his mom. The word fiancé had a new, exciting ring to it. We decided it was time to meet his mom, a woman who lived a couple of hours away in a small town. She was the epicenter of Ryan's world, the person whose opinion mattered the most to him. So, the plan was set: a weekend trip for the two of us to meet the woman who had raised my soon-to-be husband. The drive was filled with a strange tension. Ryan was visibly nervous, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror more often than necessary. He was a man on edge, and it wasn't hard to guess why. "Ryan," I said, trying to soothe his nerves. "Relax. I'm sure your mom is a wonderful person." He shot me a half-smile, his eyes still on the road. "Yeah, she's something all right." His mom's house was a picture of quaint charm, a small structure that looked like it had jumped straight out of a home and garden magazine. As we pulled up, I saw her waiting for us on the porch, a frail figure with a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Ryan, my boy," Margaret exclaimed as soon as we got out of the car, enveloping him in a tight hug. After a moment, she turned to me, her gaze icy. "You must be Sarah." I extended a hand, forcing a smile. "Yes, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet you." The afternoon was a whirlwind of conversation, a deep dive into Ryan's life and his mom's sacrifices. She painted a vivid picture of their shared journey, of the struggles they'd overcome together. It was touching, but also a bit overwhelming. "So, Sarah," she said at one point, her eyes boring into me. "Ryan tells me you're a nurse." I nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I work at the city hospital." "And your family?" she asked, her gaze never wavering. "Who do you have?" I swallowed, a lump forming in my throat. I don't remember my parents. My grandmother raised me." She nodded, her eyes softening a bit. "Well, I suppose we all have our crosses to bear." The conversation took a strange turn then. She talked about blessing our marriage, but on one condition. We had to keep sending her the monthly $1,000. I was taken aback. I knew Ryan helped her out, but this felt different. It felt like a transaction. "Ma," Ryan said, his voice firm. "We're planning to get married, not sign a contract." Margaret shot him a stern look. "This is not a negotiation, Ryan. It's what I need." Ryan looked at me, his eyes pleading. It was a tough situation, one that I didn't want to escalate. So, I agreed. I agreed to this bizarre condition, for Ryan's sake. The wedding planning kicked off with a bang. Ryan and I were excited, brimming with ideas and dreams for our big day. We had decided on a simple ceremony, something that reflected our love and commitment without breaking the bank. After all, we had a significant monthly commitment to Ryan's mom, which kept our budget modest. But love, we believed, didn't need an extravagant show. Our venue was the local church, a charming little structure with an air of warmth and familiarity. Father John, the pastor and a dear friend of Ryan's, was more than willing to officiate our wedding. His twinkling eyes and hearty congratulations made us feel even more special. The guest list was a short one, a handful of work friends, Ryan's childhood buddies, and, of course, his mom. Margaret had a strong presence in our lives, and her involvement in the wedding planning was no different. She was there at every turn, her opinions shaping our choices, from the color scheme to the menu. "I think we should serve roast beef," she declared during one of our planning sessions. "Ryan loves it." Ryan, ever the dutiful son, nodded in agreement. "But Mom," he added, "Sarah's a vegetarian. We need to consider her too." His mom simply raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's your wedding too, isn't it?" Ryan didn't argue. He simply agreed and let his mom have her way. I didn't mind much. I was too caught up in the joy of marrying the man I loved. But there was another person who was deeply involved in our wedding planning, my grandmother. She was my rock, my guiding light. She had raised me single-handedly, and her wisdom and strength had always been my inspiration. Grandma was thrilled about the wedding. She helped me pick out a simple but elegant white dress. She baked cookies for the reception, her hands working magic in the kitchen. And she was there, always there, with a smile and a word of encouragement. The day of the wedding was a whirlwind of emotions. I was nervous, excited, and a little overwhelmed. Ryan looked dashing in his blue suit, his eyes sparkling with joy. His mom, in a striking red dress, was the life of the party, chatting and laughing with everyone. The ceremony was a beautiful, heartwarming affair. Father John spoke eloquently about love and commitment, his words resonating with everyone present. As Ryan and I exchanged our vows, I could see tears in Grandma's eyes. It was a moment I would cherish forever. The reception, held in the church hall, was a fun-filled event. The roast beef was a hit, and even though I couldn't partake, I was happy to see everyone enjoying it. Ryan's mom made sure to remind everyone that it was her idea. I didn't mind. I was too caught up in the joy of the day. As the day came to a close, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We were married. We were starting a new chapter in our lives. I knew there would be challenges, but I was ready to face them. I had Ryan, and I had Grandma. I was ready for whatever life had in store for us. In the weeks following our wedding, Ryan and I were on cloud nine. We had moved into a small rented apartment and were slowly settling into our new life together. Our days were filled with love and laughter, and our nights with dreams of a future we were eager to build together. One of our major goals was to save for a down payment on a house. We had a plan, a budget, and a piggy bank that we lovingly called our future home. Every penny we saved was a step closer to our dream. But our financial plan had a significant dent, the $1,000 we sent to Ryan's mom every month. Ryan's mom was a constant presence in our lives, and not always a welcome one. She had a knack for showing up unannounced, often with a list of complaints and demands. Her favorite topic was her financial struggles and how we needed to help her more. One evening, she arrived at our apartment with a stack of papers. "Ryan, dear," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness, "we need to discuss something." Ryan, ever the obedient son, sat down with her, a look of concern on his face. "What is it, Mom?" he asked. She slid a paper across the table to him. "I need you to sign this," she said. It was a contract, a formal agreement that we, all the time we're married, would continue to send her $1,000 every month. But that wasn't all. She also wanted us to cover her utility bills, and part of other costs. Ryan was taken aback. "Mom, we're already helping you out every month. We can't afford all this," he protested. She simply shrugged. "You'll find a way," she said, her voice cold and unfeeling. I was speechless. The audacity of her demand was shocking. But before I could react, Ryan had already signed the contract. He looked at me apologetically. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said. "I didn't see this coming." I was seething with anger, not at Ryan, but at his mother. She was exploiting us, and it wasn't fair. "This isn't right," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You can't just demand money from us like this." She simply smirked. "I just did." The drive home was a silent one. I was too angry, and Ryan was too guilty. Our dream of owning a home seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a growing pile of bills and obligations. Life was a non-stop roller coaster ride with Ryan and his mother. No matter what we did, it felt like we were always under her microscope, and every move we made was met with her disapproval. It was suffocating, and it was starting to eat away at our happiness. The situation reached boiling point one evening when she came over for her usual uninvited visit. Ryan and I had been discussing the possibility of starting a family. We were excited about the idea of bringing a new life into this world. But when I shared our plans with his mother, her reaction was far from supportive. "A baby? Are you two nuts?" Margaret bellowed, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "You can barely keep your heads above water, and now you want to add a baby to this circus?" I was taken aback by her outburst. "We've thought about this, and we believe we're ready," I countered, trying to keep my voice calm. She snorted. "Ready? You think you're ready? You can't even handle your own lives, And now you want to toss a baby into the mix? I turned to Ryan, hoping he would step in, but he just sat there, his face ashen. His mother's words had struck a nerve, and he seemed lost for words. Instead of thinking about a baby, you should be thinking about me, she continued, her voice rising with each word. I'm not getting any younger. I need you to take care of me, not some snot-nosed brat. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. We're not your babysitters, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. We have our own lives to live. And we won't let you dictate them. Margaret turned to Ryan, tears welling up in her eyes. Is this how you treat your mother? Is this how you repay me for all I've done for you? Ryan looked at me, then at his mother. I could see the turmoil in his eyes. He was caught between his loyalty to his mother and his love for me. Finally, he spoke up. Mom's right, Sarah, he said, his voice wavering. We're not ready for a baby. We have too many responsibilities already. His words were like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to him, my eyes filled with disbelief. So, you're taking her side now? He didn't answer, just looked down at his hands. That was all the answer I needed. I got up and stormed out of the room, leaving Ryan and his mother alone. That night, Ryan and I had the biggest argument we've ever had. We yelled, we cried, we said things we didn't mean. But in the end, nothing was resolved. He still sided with his mother, and I was left feeling betrayed and alone. The following weeks were a nightmare. Ryan's mother was more intrusive than ever, and Ryan was more distant. As a result, I just stopped communicating with Margaret, even if it was rude, but not seeing her was already a great achievement. She called me an impudent girl and stopped calling me too. I'd been noticing a change in Ryan for a while. He was always on his phone, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he sent text after text. He was coming home late from work, his excuse always the same, just got caught up at the office, babe. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I tried to convince myself that it was just work stress, that he was just busy. But deep down, I knew something was off. My suspicions were confirmed when my best friend, Lisa, called me one evening. Sarah, I don't know how to say this, she began, her voice shaking. I found Ryan's profile on that dating site we used to use. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What? That's impossible, I stammered, my mind racing. He wouldn't. I'm sorry, Sarah, Lisa said, her voice filled with sympathy. I thought you should know. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there. When Ryan came home that night, I confronted him. Who is she, Ryan? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Who are you texting all the time? Who are you meeting on that dating site? Ryan looked at me, his face pale. I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. Don't lie to me, Ryan. I yelled, my patience wearing thin. I know about the dating site. I know you're seeing someone else. Ryan didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at me. Then, he let out a sigh. I'm sorry, Sarah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want you to find out this way. I felt a surge of anger. So, you admit it? You've been cheating on me? Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with guilt. I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I loved, the man I had planned to start a family with, was cheating on me. And to make matters worse, he wasn't even sorry about it. I want a divorce, Ryan, I said, my voice steady. I can't be with someone I can't trust. Ryan didn't argue, didn't try to convince me to stay. He just nodded, his face a mask of guilt and regret. 6 months had passed since my divorce from Ryan, and life was starting to settle into a new rhythm. I was learning to live alone, to be independent. Then, my grandmother passed away. She'd been a rock in my life, a woman of strength and wisdom. Her passing left me with a gaping hole, but also, unexpectedly, a considerable inheritance. She'd left me her old mansion, a beautiful house with vast gardens and rooms filled with antique furniture. And there was also a hefty sum of money, enough to let me live comfortably for the rest of my life. I was shocked, overwhelmed, but also grateful. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life. Just as I was starting to adjust to this new reality, there was a knock on the door. Standing on my doorstep was none other than Ryan's mother, a woman who'd always been a thorn in my side. "Well, look at you, living in luxury," she sneered, looking around the mansion with greedy eyes. "I heard about your little windfall. You must be over the moon." I crossed my arms, raising an eyebrow at her. "What do you want, Margaret?" She put on a saccharine smile, her eyes still scanning the house. "Well, dear, I thought it's only fair that since you and my son are married, I should get a share of this fortune." I couldn't help but laugh. "Margaret, you're out of the loop. Ryan and I divorced 6 months ago." Her eyes widened, and she sputtered. "What? No, that can't be right. Ryan would have told me." "Call him and ask," I suggested, leaning against the doorframe. "He'll confirm it." She pulled out her phone, dialed Ryan's number, and put it on speaker. "Ryan, tell me it's not true," she demanded when he answered. "Tell me you and Sarah are still married." There was a pause, and then Ryan's voice came through, sounding resigned. "No, Mom, we're not. We divorced 6 months ago." Ryan's mom ended the call, her face pale. "You've made a fool of me," she said, her voice trembling. "And you, Ryan, you're an idiot for letting this gold mine slip through your fingers." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed off, leaving me standing in the doorway, shaking with laughter. It felt good to finally stand up to Margaret, to see her taken down a peg. I'd been through a lot, but I was coming out the other side stronger, more confident. My new life was just beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. I had a beautiful house, financial security, and most importantly, I was free from the shackles of an unhappy marriage. As I closed the door, I couldn't help but smile. Life was looking up. The sun had already started to set when I heard the knock. I opened the door to find my ex-husband, Ryan, standing there. His sudden appearance was as surprising as it was unwelcome. "What the hell are you doing here, Ryan?" I asked, my voice laced with annoyance. I heard about your inheritance, Sarah," he stammered, his eyes darting around the grand entrance of the mansion. "Is it true?" I crossed my arms over my chest, raising an eyebrow at him. "Yeah, it's true. My grandmother left me her house and a substantial amount of money." "What's it to you?" Ryan swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving mine. "I was thinking, maybe we could give it another shot, Sarah," he said, his voice shaky. "I've been a fool. I let my mother dictate our lives. I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I want to make it right." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Oh, now you want to make it right?" I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. "Now that I'm rich, you suddenly want to be a better man? You think I can't see right through you, Ryan?" Ryan looked taken aback by my words, but he quickly composed himself. "It's not like that, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with desperation. I've changed. I can be a better man. I can make it up to you." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see the greed in his eyes, the dollar signs practically flashing in his pupils. He was no different from his arrogant mother. He was just after my money. "Listen here, Ryan," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You had your chance. You blew it. Now, you want to waltz back into my life because I've come into some money? You're even more pathetic than I thought. Ryan flinched at my words, but he didn't back down. I just want to make it right, Sarah, he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. I just want another chance. I shook my head, a humorless smile on my face. You're not getting another chance, Ryan, I said, my voice steady. You're not getting a dime of my money. Now get off my property before I call the cops. With that, I slammed the door in his face, leaving him standing on the doorstep. I could hear him calling out to me, begging for forgiveness, but I ignored him. I had better things to do than listen to his empty promises and pleas. I walked away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd finally stood up to Ryan, to his manipulations and his lies. I'd finally stood up for myself. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking about Ryan less and less. I was moving on, slowly but surely. I was building a new life for myself, a life that was mine and mine alone. I made new friends, people who liked me for who I was, not for my money or my mansion. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding joy in helping those who couldn't help themselves. I was finally living my life on my own terms, and it felt amazing.
Hi, everyone, I'm Kira, and this is my story. Life before the pregnancy was simple and happy. Jack and I would spend evenings talking about our days. He'd share stories about his corporate challenges, and I'd tell him about the school kids' antics. But when I broke the news of the pregnancy, things took a turn I never anticipated. One evening, as Jack walked in, I was setting the table, battling waves of nausea but determined to keep things normal. "Hey, Jack, how was work today?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. He barely looked up from his phone. "Same old, Kira. Deadlines and demands. What's for dinner?" I felt a pang of disappointment at his disinterest but brushed it aside. "I made your favorite, spaghetti. But, I need to tell you something important." Jack finally looked up, his brow raised. "What's up? You look pale. Don't tell me you're sick. We can't afford a doctor's bill right now." The concern in his voice was overshadowed by the hint of irritation. I hesitated but knew I couldn't keep it in any longer. "It's not that, Jack. I'm pregnant." For a moment, there was silence. The air felt heavy. Jack's face, usually so full of confidence, went blank. "Pregnant? Are you sure, Kira?" His voice was a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. "Yes, the tests confirmed it. We're going to have a baby, Jack." I tried to sound excited, hoping my enthusiasm would be contagious. Jack didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, lost in thought. The silence stretched between us, and I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach. This wasn't the reaction I'd hoped for. Finally, he looked up, his eyes hard. "Kira, you know my job's been on the line with all the cutbacks. And now this? How are we supposed to manage with a baby? Have you thought about that?" His words stung. I had imagined joy, hugs, maybe even happy tears. But instead, there was this, a cold, hard dose of reality served by the man I loved. "I know, Jack, it's unexpected. But it's also a blessing, isn't it? We can make it work. Maybe I can take some extra tutoring on the side, and..." Jack cut me off, his voice rising. "Extra tutoring? Kira, you're not thinking straight. A baby is not just about extra expenses for a few months. It's a lifelong commitment. And with your job, how are you going to manage?" I recoiled at his tone. This wasn't a discussion, it was a confrontation. My attempt to keep peace shattered like glass under the weight of his words. "Jack, please, let's just talk about this calmly. We can make a plan, figure out the finances." But he was already grabbing his coat, his face a mask of frustration and anger. I need some air. We'll talk about this later, Kira. Or better yet, you figure it out. You're the one who's so happy about this blessing. And with that, he was gone, the door slamming shut behind him. I stood alone in our small kitchen, the untouched spaghetti cooling on the table, a symbol of our suddenly uncertain future. Weeks had passed since I broke the news to Jack, and each day felt like walking on thin ice. I was doing my best, trying to keep up with my teaching job despite the nausea that hit me without warning. But the day came when my body couldn't keep up, and I had to face the inevitable. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the unpaid leave form from the school in front of me, my hands trembling as I waited for Jack to come home. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet room, each second stretching into eternity. The door finally opened, and Jack walked in, his face buried in his phone. He barely glanced at me as he took off his coat. "Jack, we need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, a sound of tired irritation. "What is it now, Kira? I've had a day from hell at work. Can it wait?" I shook my head, feeling the weight of the moment. "It's about my job. I can't keep up, not with the baby and my health. I had to take unpaid leave." The words hung in the air, and I watched as Jack's expression turned from annoyance to disbelief, then to anger. "Unpaid leave? Are you out of your mind, Kira? How in the hell are we supposed to manage without your salary? Did you even think about that before making this brilliant decision?" His voice was rising, each word a sharp jab at my already fragile state. I tried to keep calm, to explain the situation. "Jack, please understand. I'm not doing this by choice. The doctor said it's crucial for the baby's health. I'm sick all the time, I can't stand up in front of a class without feeling like I'm going to pass out. What was I supposed to do?" But my words seemed to fuel his anger even more. "You always have an excuse, don't you, Kira? It's always something with you. First, you bring this surprise pregnancy on me, and now this? What's next? Are you going to tell me you can't even take care of the baby once it's here?" His words stung like venom, and I felt tears pricking my eyes. This wasn't the Jack I knew, the man I had married. "Jack, please, you're not being fair. I'm doing the best I can. It's not like I'm sitting around, enjoying this. Do you think I like being sick, feeling weak all the time? This is hard for me too, you know." There was a moment of silence as Jack paced the room, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing heavy. "You know what, Kira? I'm done. I'm done dealing with this day in, day out. You figure out how to manage your situation, but don't expect me to stand around and watch our lives go down the drain because you can't handle it. I've got my own problems to deal with." The days following our confrontation felt like moving through a thick fog. Jack's presence in the house became like a shadow, barely speaking, his face a mask of cold indifference. I missed the sound of his laughter, the warmth of his touch, but all that seemed like a distant memory now, buried under the weight of our current reality. I was sprawled on the couch, a hand on my belly, trying to find some comfort in the little life growing inside me, when Jack walked in from work. His steps were heavy, the slamming of the door louder than usual. "Jack, you're home early," I said, attempting to break the ice that had formed between us. He grunted in response, tossing his keys on the table with a clatter. "Yeah, well, not like there's anything better to do. Can't exactly go out with the guys knowing I've got a whole circus to deal with at home." His words were like daggers, and I felt my heart sink. "Jack, I don't know what to say anymore. I'm trying here, really trying. But it's like nothing I do is right in your eyes." He let out a dry laugh, void of any humor. "Right? Kira, let's not kid ourselves. You lying around all day while I bust my ass at work, that's not trying. That's you taking a vacation at my expense." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the man I married. Vacation? You think this is a vacation for me? Being sick all the time, feeling like I'm a burden to you? This is a nightmare, Jack. I wish you could understand. Jack poured himself a drink, his back turned to me. Understand? Oh, I understand all right. I understand that I'm supposed to be the provider, the protector. But what's the point when the person you're supposed to be protecting doesn't even try to help herself? I tried to sit up, fighting the dizziness that came with the movement. Help myself? How, Jack? Tell me, because I'd love to know. I'm carrying our child, dealing with this sickness every day. What more do you want from me? He downed his drink in one go, the glass hitting the table with a thud. I want a partner, Kira. Someone who stands by me, not someone who adds to the load. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? It's always about you and your problems. Tears blurred my vision, the words choking in my throat. Jack, I'm your wife. Your partner. But it feels like I'm nothing to you now. I'm scared, Jack. Scared of what's happening to us, scared of facing this alone. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that screams louder than words. Then Jack stood up, his figure looming over me. Scared? You're not the only one, Kira. But unlike you, I don't have the luxury of breaking down. I've got to keep it together, for both of us. Because if I don't, who will? The day we had the appointment with Dr. Harris felt like walking into a storm. I knew how important it was for Jack to understand what I was going through, but his reluctance hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. As we sat in Dr. Harris's office, the doctor's gaze was kind but serious. I've asked you both here because it's crucial to understand the reality of Kira's condition. Nausea during pregnancy can be debilitating, and it's not uncommon for it to last throughout the pregnancy. Jack shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a skeptical smile on his face. Come on, Doc. Are you telling me this nausea thing is real? I mean, people go to work sick all the time. Kira's just taking it easy, right? Dr. Harris's expression didn't change. Jack, this isn't about taking it easy. Pregnancy can significantly impact a woman's body. It's not something one can simply shrug off. Kira's not pretending. This is a serious medical condition that requires support and understanding, especially from her partner. I could feel Jack's impatience growing, his disbelief a tangible force in the room. Seriously, Doc? So, what, I'm supposed to believe that she can't do a thing because of a little morning sickness? I work hard every day. It's not like I can just call in sick whenever I feel like it. Dr. Harris leaned forward, his voice firm. Jack, this isn't a little morning sickness. This is a condition that is affecting Kira's health and well-being. It's not a matter of toughness or endurance. It's a medical reality, and belittling it won't change the facts. I watched as Jack's smirk faded, replaced by a stubborn set to his jaw. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. I don't have time for this. Kira, you're a grown woman. Stop acting like you're the only one who's ever been pregnant. Dr. Harris tried to interject, but Jack was already at the door. I'm sorry, Doc, but I'm not buying it. She's just avoiding work and chores, and now you're telling me to pamper her? That's not happening. And with that, Jack walked out, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Dr. Harris looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. Kira, I'm sorry. But please know, you're not alone in this. We'll find a way to manage your symptoms and get you the support you need. I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. The doctor's office, once a place of reassurance, now felt like the eye of the storm, with the hardest part still to come. The day of the corporate party loomed over us like a dark cloud. I felt a knot in my stomach, knowing that being around so many people, with their perfumes and the food, would be a challenge with my condition. But Jack was insistent. Kira, you have to pull yourself together for this. It's important for my job, for our future, Jack said as he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. I was sitting on the bed, feeling weak and anxious. Jack, I really don't think I can handle it. The nausea, the smells, it's too much. Can't you go alone this time? Jack turned to me, his expression hard and unyielding. No, Kira. I won't go alone. You need to get over this nonsense and come with me. Everyone's bringing their spouses. What will they think if I show up without you? I tried to reason with him, my voice shaky. It's not nonsense, Jack. You know how bad it's been. I can't control when it hits. What if I get sick at the party? I don't want to embarrass you in front of your colleagues. He let out a harsh laugh, devoid of any real amusement. Embarrass me? Kira, you're already doing that by not going. You think people don't talk? They see you barely leave the house, hear about you not working. Now you want to add to the gossip by making me go to this party alone. The accusation stung, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. That's not fair, Jack. I'm struggling every day. This isn't about gossip, it's about my health, our baby's health. Jack's face softened for a moment, but the hardness quickly returned. Your health? What about my health, Kira? My career? You think I don't have enough on my plate? Now suck it up, get dressed, and let's go. We're already late. Feeling defeated and scared, I slowly got up and started getting ready. The drive to the party was silent, the tension between us thick enough to cut through. As we walked into the building, the noise and the smells hit me like a wave. My stomach churned, and I felt the color drain from my face. Jack was busy greeting his colleagues, a forced smile plastered on his face. Jack, I really don't feel good, I whispered, clutching his arm. He looked at me, annoyance flashing in his eyes. Not now, Kira. Just try to get through the evening. It's important for me. But it was too much. The room started spinning, and I knew I was going to be sick. I tugged at Jack's sleeve, desperation in my voice. Jack, I need to get out of here. Please. That's when it happened. Jack's grip on my arm tightened, and he pulled me away from the crowd, hissing in my ear. You just can't help yourself, can you? Always making a scene. Just go, then. Get out of here if you're going to be like this. He dragged me out into the corridor, his grip bruising my arm. I could barely stand, the nausea overwhelming me. Jack, please, I can't. But he was relentless. With a rough shove, he pushed me towards the exit. Walk home, Kira. And don't you dare come back until you've learned not to embarrass me like this. Leaning against the cool wall of the hallway, I struggled to catch my breath, the taste of humiliation and nausea bitter in my mouth. The bright lights of the party seemed a world away, and in that moment, I felt utterly alone. But then, the sound of approaching footsteps broke through my daze. Ma'am, are you all right? The voice was deep, tinged with genuine concern. I looked up to see an elderly man standing before me, his eyes searching my face for an answer. I tried to muster a response, my words tangled with sobs. I'm not okay. My husband, he just doesn't understand. The man's expression turned stern, yet his voice remained gentle. What's your husband's name, if you don't mind me asking? Between shaky breaths, I managed to utter, Jack. Jack Harrison. A flicker of recognition crossed the man's face, but he quickly masked it with a nod. I see. And why, may I ask, did he leave you out here all alone? The concern in his voice was a balm to my frayed nerves. I found myself confiding in this stranger, telling him about the pregnancy, the nausea, and how Jack had dismissed my struggles and pushed me away. The man listened intently, his jaw tightening with every word I spoke. That's no way for a man to treat his wife, especially in your condition. Jack ought to be ashamed. What kind of partner turns his back on his family when they need him most? His words, spoken with such conviction, stirred something within me, a flicker of hope, a sense of validation I hadn't felt in a long time. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel so lost, I admitted, the weight of my situation pressing down on me. The man placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, his gaze steady and reassuring. You're not alone. Not anymore. Come, let's find you a place to sit down and get some water. You need to take care of yourself, for your sake and your baby's. As we walked to a quieter area, I couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for this kind stranger's kindness. We found a secluded table, and he brought over a glass of water, urging me to take small sips. The man then took a seat across from me, his demeanor shifting from compassionate to resolute. I'm going to have a word with Jack. It's high time someone set him straight. No one should treat their partner the way he's treated you tonight. Before I could protest, the man was on his feet, his figure exuding an authority that made me realize he was someone of significance. But more than that, he was someone who saw my pain and chose to stand by me when I felt most vulnerable. It wasn't long before the calm was shattered by a commotion coming from the main hall. Curiosity got the better of me, and I edged closer to see what was happening. There, in the center of the room, stood the elderly man, now commanding the attention of everyone. Beside him was Jack, looking like he wished the ground would swallow him whole. I could barely hear over the murmur of the crowd, but the stern voice of the older man cut through the noise. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you not just as the director of this company but as someone who believes in the core values we all hold dear. It has come to my attention that one of our own has grossly failed to uphold these values in his personal life. The room fell silent, every eye locked on the scene unfolding. Jack's face had turned an ashen color, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. The director continued, his gaze unwavering. Jack Harrison, you have not only let down this company but also the very family you vowed to protect and respect. Mocking your pregnant wife, leaving her in distress, is behavior that I cannot, and will not, tolerate under any circumstances. I could feel the eyes in the room shifting between Jack and the director, whispers and murmurs filling the space with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Jack finally found his voice, though it was nothing more than a weak stammer. Sir, you don't understand. Kira, she's just overreacting. She's making it all up. It's not like it sounds. The director's eyes narrowed, his disappointment clear. Overreacting? Jack, you were seen manhandling your wife, dismissing her health concerns, and leaving her alone and unwell. Is that the kind of man you are? Is that the example you set? Jack seemed to shrink with every word, his usual bravado fading into nothingness. The crowd was watching, some with open disapproval, others with whispered conversations behind their hands. Sir, please, I didn't mean for it to. I was just stressed, that's all. Jack pleaded, his voice barely audible. The director shook his head, his decision made. Stress is no excuse for your behavior, Jack. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties at this company. I will not have someone who exhibits such disregard for their family representing us in any capacity. The finality in the director's voice left no room for argument. Jack stood there, defeated and alone, as the director turned his attention to the crowd. Let this be a reminder to all of us. Our actions, both in our professional and personal lives, reflect on who we are. Let's strive to be better, to support and respect those around us. As the director stepped down, the room erupted into a low buzz of conversations. Jack made a hasty exit, his fall from grace complete. The days following the party felt surreal, like I was living in a dream, or perhaps finally waking up from a nightmare. The silence in the house was no longer suffocating, it was peaceful, a space for me to breathe and gather my thoughts. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, I watched the early morning sun paint the room with a gentle light. It was then that the doorbell rang, a sound that once would have sent a jolt of anxiety through me. But not today. Today, I felt a strange sense of calm. I opened the door to find Jack's director standing there, his face somber yet kind. Kira, may I come in? I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Of course, please. As we sat at the table, the director folded his hands, his gaze meeting mine. I wanted to check on you, after everything that happened. And to talk about what comes next. I took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling in my heart. Thank you. It's been a lot to process. But I feel like it's time to move forward, to make some changes. The director nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. That's a good mindset to have. And you won't be alone in this. The company has a support system for situations like these. We can offer counseling, legal advice if you need it, and financial support, especially with the baby on the way. The kindness in his offer brought tears to my eyes. I don't know what to say. Thank you. This means so much to me. He offered a gentle smile. It's the least we can do. No one should go through what you've been through alone. And as for Jack, he's been given the resources to seek help too. It's up to him to decide what to do with them. I nodded, a sense of closure washing over me. Jack's path was his to choose, but mine was clear now. It was time to rebuild, to create a new life for myself and my baby. The director stood, placing a business card on the table. If you need anything at all, you call this number. We're here for you, Kira. After he left, I looked around the quiet house, the walls echoing with the promise of a new beginning. I picked up the business card, running my fingers over the embossed letters. It was more than just a piece of paper, it was a lifeline, a symbol of hope. I took a sip of my tea, the warmth spreading through me. With the support of people who cared and the strength I had found within myself, I knew I could create a brighter future, a new dawn not just for me, but for the little life growing inside me. And as I watched the sun climb higher into the sky, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning.
Life in my early years was a silent movie, played within the confines of a home that felt more like a fortress. My family, bound by strict norms that bordered on the extreme, watched my every move, every word, and every breath I took. It was a life of muted colors, where expressions were guarded, and spontaneity was a distant dream. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the first crack in that rigid world. She saw the life I was living and decided it was no life for a child. With a determination that matched her compassion, she pulled me out of that house when I was 13 and introduced me to a world where love wasn't just a whispered word but an everyday reality. Under her care, I blossomed. I traded silence for soft laughter, restrictions for freedom, and fear for love. But the shadows of my early years lingered, shaping me into a shy, modest young woman, whose comfort zone was the small, safe world I had built around myself. Web design became my chosen path, a career that allowed me to weave my creativity into the fabric of the digital world while staying within the protective walls of my home. My laptop was my window to the world, a world where I could be bold in my designs yet safeguarded from the direct gaze of society. On my 30th birthday, Grandma Eleanor decided it was time for me to meet someone, a thought that both thrilled and terrified me. Through her network, she found Ethan, a man just a few years my senior, known for his charm and seemingly gentle nature. Our first meeting was at a local diner, a place where the aroma of coffee and the buzz of quiet conversations created a comforting backdrop. Ethan walked in, his presence like a new chapter waiting to be written. "Lily, right? Your grandma's told me so much about you. Heard you're quite the artist with your web designs," Ethan said, his voice smooth, his smile easy. A blush crept up my cheeks, unaccustomed to such direct praise. "Thank you, Ethan. That's kind of you to say. And yes, design is my passion." As we talked, a connection began to form, gentle and tentative, like the first rays of sun after a long night. Ethan's words were like a balm, soothing the years of conditioned caution and reserve. "Lily, there's something about you. Your modesty, it's refreshing in this loud world. It's like discovering a quiet cove in a stormy sea," he said, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that stirred something deep within me. His words, so full of promise and understanding, touched a part of me that I had kept hidden, locked away from the world. You know, Lily, I've always believed that true strength lies in being yourself, in a world that tries to make you like everyone else. I see that strength in you," Ethan continued, his voice sincere and warm. The days following that first meeting with Ethan were like stepping into a new world, one where the colors were brighter, and life felt more vivid. Our encounters were simple but meaningful, centered around long conversations over coffee, walks in the park, and shared laughter that seemed to echo long after we parted. One brisk afternoon, as we strolled through the park with leaves crunching under our feet, Ethan turned to me, his eyes shining with an idea. "Lily, you ever been to the old Wilson's farm? They've got this apple orchard, look straight out at a postcard in the fall." I shook my head, a smile spreading across my face. "Can't say I have, Ethan. My adventures have been pretty limited to the digital world, you know?" He chuckled, a sound that warmed me from the inside out. "Well, guess it's about time we change that. What'd you say about going there this Saturday? They say there's nothing like picking apples on a crisp fall morning." And just like that, our quiet, comfortable routine expanded to include these little adventures. Each moment with Ethan felt like a step away from my old life, a life of restrictions and silence, into something more vibrant, more alive. The days turned into weeks, and the connection between us grew stronger, more profound. It wasn't just about shared interests or mutual attraction, it was about understanding, about finding someone who saw me for who I was and cherished that. One cool evening, as we sat on a bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan's voice broke the comfortable silence between us. "Lily, I've gotta tell you, these past weeks with you, they've been something else. You've got this quiet strength, this grace about you. It's rare, and it's beautiful," he said, his words wrapping around me like a warm blanket. His compliment caught me off guard, and I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know what to say. You make it easy to be myself, to open up." He took my hand in his touch gentle yet firm. "That's all I ask, Lily. For you to be yourself. Because who you are is pretty amazing. I was thinking, maybe, just maybe, we can turn this us into something more, something lasting." His words hung in the air, a question and a promise all at once. I looked into his eyes, seeing not just the man I had come to know and care for, but a future, a possibility of a life filled with laughter, understanding, and love. "I'd like that, Ethan. More than you know," I replied, my heart feeling lighter, more hopeful than it had in years. Life took a sharp turn when I moved in with Ethan and his mother, Mrs. Clayton. The house, which I had imagined would be a sanctuary of love and warmth, quickly revealed itself as a battleground of expectations and criticism. It was on the first morning in my new home that Mrs. Clayton laid down the law. I was in the kitchen, trying to make a good impression by preparing breakfast, when she walked in, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. "Lily, let's get one thing straight. You're part of this family now, and in this house, we have rules. You're gonna take care of the cooking and the cleaning. Got it?" Her voice was sharp, leaving no room for protest. Taken aback, I could only nod. "Yes, Mrs. Clayton. I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes narrowed as she inspected the kitchen. "And I expect things to be done right. I run a tight ship here. No slacking." With that, she left the room, leaving me to absorb the reality of my new life. Each day became a relentless cycle of household chores. I'd wake up early, cook breakfast, then clean, then work on my web design projects, and then cook again. It was as if my entire existence had been reduced to serving the needs of the house. Ethan, whom I had thought to be my partner and protector, seemed oblivious to the strain I was under. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I decided to voice my concerns. "Ethan, I need to talk to you about something," I started, my hands nervously twisting the dish towel. He looked up from his laptop, his expression one of mild annoyance. "What's up, Lily?" It's about your mom, and the housework. It's a lot. And I feel like it's all on me, I said, the words spilling out in a rush. Ethan's eyes went back to his screen as he shrugged. Well, yeah. Mom said in her ways. It's just how things are done here. You'll get used to it. But, Ethan, it's not fair. It's not right. I'm working too, and I have my own life. I'm not just here to cook and clean, I protested, feeling a spark of defiance ignite within me. Ethan sighed, a sound of exasperation. Lily, don't make a big deal out of this. Mom's the boss of the house. Just try to keep her happy, okay? His words felt like a slap, a stark reminder that my feelings, my exhaustion, were of little consequence in this household. The web of control in the Clayton household tightened its grip around me as the days passed. It wasn't just about the cooking and cleaning anymore. My modest earnings from web design, which I had cherished as my own, became the next target in the Clayton family's playbook of dominance. It was a typical evening. I was sitting at the dining table, finalizing a project on my laptop, when Ethan and Mrs. Clayton cornered me with a conversation I wasn't prepared for. Lily, we need to talk about your work, Ethan started, his tone serious. I looked up, puzzled. My work? What about it? Mrs. Clayton interjected, her voice sharp and commanding. Your money, dear. It's time you start contributing to the household. You live here, after all. I felt a knot form in my stomach. But I do contribute, Mrs. Clayton. I take care of the house, the meals. Ethan cut me off. That's not enough, Lily. We're talking about financial contribution. Your earnings should be going into the family account. It's only fair. The unfairness of it all hit me like a wave. But that's my money, Ethan. I earn it. I have my own expenses, my own needs. Mrs. Clayton scoffed. Needs? What needs could you possibly have that are more important than this family? No, dear, your place is to support this household, just like we support you. Ethan nodded in agreement, his eyes void of the understanding and warmth they once held. It's decided then. From now on, your earnings go to the family account. I'll take care of the finances. I felt cornered, trapped. The little financial independence I had was being stripped away, leaving me more vulnerable than ever. But Ethan, this isn't right. It's not fair. I should have a say in how my money is used. He shrugged, a cold, dismissive gesture that sent shivers down my spine. Fair? Life's not fair, Lily. You're part of this family now, and this is how things work here. Mrs. Clayton's eyes bore into me, ensuring her message was loud and clear. You'll thank us later, dear. We're teaching you how to be part of a family, how to be a proper wife. As they left me there, alone with my racing thoughts, the reality of my situation became painfully clear. My income, my hard-earned money, was now under their control. Trapped in the Clayton household, my life had become a never-ending cycle of servitude. The financial control Ethan and his mother exerted over me was suffocating. My earnings, once a source of independence, were now tightly gripped in their hands. The situation was unbearable, yet I felt powerless to change it. One day, I decided to seek solace in the one place I always felt understood, the web design forum. Typing away on my laptop, I poured my heart out to Sarah, a fellow designer I had befriended online. Sarah, I'm in a bad place. Ethan and his mom, they're controlling everything, even my earnings. I don't know what to do, I typed, the words on the screen blurring through my tears. Almost instantly, Sarah's reply popped up. Lily, that's not right. They're manipulating you. That's financial abuse, you know. Her words were a jolt of reality. Abuse? I typed back, the word feeling foreign yet painfully accurate. Yes, abuse. Lily, you need to protect yourself. Read up on psychological abuse and financial control. Knowledge is power, Sarah urged. Taking her advice to heart, I started reading. Books on psychology, articles on financial abuse, stories of people who had walked the path I was on. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton weren't just overbearing, they were abusers, using manipulation and control to keep me under their thumb. One evening, as I was absorbed in a book on psychological growth, Mrs. Clayton barged into my room, her eyes scanning the title in my hands. "What's this nonsense you're reading, Lily?" she demanded, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's a book on personal growth, Mrs. Clayton," I replied, a newfound strength in my voice. She snorted, "Personal growth? Don't fill your head with such rubbish. Your place is here, taking care of this family, not reading silly books." But her words, which would have once sent me into a spiral of self-doubt, now bounced off me. I had begun to see through their game, to understand the dynamics of control and abuse. "Ethan, your mother thinks my reading is rubbish," I said later that evening, hoping to find an ally in him. Ethan, however, was far from supportive. "Mom's right, Lily. You're getting ideas above your station. Focus on your duties here. That's what's important." His words were a crushing blow, yet they only fueled my determination. It was clear now, I was alone in this fight. But I was no longer the timid, compliant Lily they thought they knew. The knowledge I had armed myself with was my weapon, and I was ready to use it. Life at the Claytons had pushed me to my limits. I had been enduring, silently suffering under the weight of their control and manipulation. But everything changed the day fate intervened in the most unexpected way. It was a regular morning, and I was out running errands, lost in my thoughts, when suddenly, out of nowhere, a car came speeding around the corner. Before I could react, everything went black. I woke up in a sterile hospital room, my body aching and my mind foggy. As my vision cleared, I saw Ethan and Mrs. Clayton standing by my bedside. But their expressions weren't of concern or worry, they were of irritation and anger. "Lily, what were you thinking, wandering around like that? Do you have any idea how inconvenient this is for us?" Ethan's voice was harsh, void of any warmth. Mrs. Clayton chimed in, her words sharp and cold. "Yes, and now who's going to take care of the house, the cooking, the cleaning? You've put us in quite a bind, Lily." I lay there, stunned, not by the pain from my injuries, but by the sheer lack of empathy from the people I had been living with. I'm sorry," I managed to whisper, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Ethan's face twisted into a scowl. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Lily. We need you back on your feet, taking care of your responsibilities. This little stunt of yours is unacceptable." Mrs. Clayton nodded in agreement, her eyes scanning me with disdain. "Absolutely. And once you're back, we expect you to make up for the lost time. No slacking." Their words, their complete disregard for my well-being, lit a fire within me. It was the turning point, the moment I realized that I was nothing more than a convenience to them, a tool to be used and discarded at will. "Enough," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm not your maid, not your cook, not your ATM. I'm a human being, and I deserve respect, care, and empathy, none of which you've shown." Ethan's eyes widened in shock, clearly not expecting resistance. "Lily, you're not thinking straight. You need to calm down and think about your duties, your place in this family." But I was done. Done with being told my place, done with being treated like a nobody. "My place," I said, my voice steady, "is not here, not with you. I deserve better, and I will have better." The doctor walked in at that moment, breaking the tension. He explained my injuries, the fractures, and the long road to recovery. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's faces fell as they realized the implications, the weeks of convalescence, the medical expenses, and the absence of their obedient housekeeper. Ethan, his voice laced with frustration, turned to me. If you think you're going to sit back and enjoy a vacation at our expense, you're mistaken. If you're not back on your feet and fulfilling your duties in a month, consider this marriage over." For the first time, his threat didn't scare me, it liberated me. "Ethan," I said, a smile tugging at the corners of my bruised lips, "I'm ready for that divorce. It's the best news I've heard in months." Their shocked faces were the last things I saw before they stormed out of the room. Lying in that hospital bed, I realized the crash hadn't just broken my bones, it had shattered the chains that bound me. A couple of days after Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's disastrous visit, a nurse wheeled in a small cart with my personal belongings, a bag that Ethan had left for me. Among the items was my laptop, my gateway to the world and, more importantly, to my independence. As I slowly, painfully opened the laptop, the screen welcomed me like an old friend. I was about to embark on the most crucial project of my life, my liberation. I began by drafting an email to my lawyer, detailing the years of financial control, emotional manipulation, and the recent threats from Ethan and his mother. My fingers trembled, but with each word typed, I felt stronger, more in control. A few days later, Ethan came to visit, his demeanor a mix of anger and disbelief. "Lily, what's this nonsense about a lawyer? You think you can take me on?" he scoffed, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. I looked at him, my resolve unwavering. "It's not nonsense, Ethan. It's the truth. I'm done being your puppet. I'm taking back my life, my money, my dignity." He laughed, a cold, harsh sound. You don't have the guts. You're nothing without me, without us." But I wasn't the old Lily anymore. "Watch me, Ethan. You and your mother have controlled and used me for long enough. Those days are over." His face reddened, a vein throbbing in his neck. "You'll regret this, Lily. You'll come crawling back." I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. "I'd rather crawl through fire than come back to you." After Ethan stormed out, the days blended into weeks. My body was healing, but more importantly, my spirit was healing too. I spent hours reading, learning, and preparing for the battle ahead. The hospital room, once a symbol of my vulnerability, had become my war room. The day I was discharged from the hospital marked the beginning of my new life. Grandma Eleanor, frail but with a spirit as strong as ever, was by my side as I walked out of the hospital. Her eyes, filled with tears of pride and relief, told me all I needed to know. I was on the right path. "Grandma, I'm scared, but I'm ready," I told her, my voice steady. She squeezed my hand. "I know, my dear. And you're not alone. We're in this together." The journey back to Grandma Eleanor's house was quiet, but it was a silence filled with determination and hope. The old Lily was gone, and in her place stood a woman ready to reclaim her life, one step at a time. The morning of the hearing, Grandma Eleanor and I sat at the kitchen table, a silent understanding between us. "Lily, you ready for this?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. I nodded, feeling a surge of strength from her unwavering support. "I am, Grandma. It's time to put an end to this, once and for all." At the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton were already there, their faces a mask of arrogance and disbelief. They still couldn't fathom that the once submissive Lily was challenging them. As we walked past them, Ethan's voice, cold and mocking, reached my ears. "You really think you can win this, Lily? You're just a nobody." I stopped, turning to face him, my gaze unflinching. "I am somebody, Ethan. And today, you'll see just how much you underestimated me." The court proceedings were a blur, with testimonies given and evidence presented. My lawyer was a pillar of strength, laying out the years of financial and emotional abuse with precision and clarity. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's lawyer tried to discredit me, painting me as an ungrateful wife. But the recordings I had made, the meticulous records of their controlling behavior, and the financial statements spoke louder than their lies. As the judge pronounced the verdict, favoring me and granting significant compensation, the look of shock and defeat on Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's faces was a sight I would never forget. Outside the courthouse, Ethan approached, his demeanor now that of a defeated man. "Lily, please, let's talk about this. We can settle it without the compensation. You don't have to do this." I looked at him, the man I once believed would protect me, now a mere shadow of his former self. "No, Ethan. You had your chance. You chose to control and abuse instead of love and respect. This is the consequence of your actions." Mrs. Clayton, her pride shattered, joined in, her voice trembling. "Lily, please, I'm an old woman. Have some mercy." I shook my head, the final pieces of the emotional shackles they had bound me with falling away. "Mercy was what I begged for when you controlled every aspect of my life, Mrs. Clayton. It's too late for that now." As Grandma Eleanor and I walked away, the weight of years of oppression lifting off my shoulders, I knew that this was more than just a legal victory. It was the triumph of justice, the affirmation of my strength, and the beginning of a new chapter. But the story didn't end there. News of Ethan's and Mrs. Clayton's actions spread, reaching Ethan's workplace. His colleagues started looking at him differently, whispers followed him around, and soon, his position at work was demoted. He was a shadow of his former self, condemned and despised for his actions. Mrs. Clayton faced her own downfall. She found herself ostracized, her name synonymous with manipulation and cruelty. Decent society closed its doors on her, her past actions casting a long shadow over her present. As for me, life was opening new doors. It was a chance to start fresh, to build a life on my terms. The battle was tough, but it led to a new beginning, a future where I was no longer a victim, but the author of my own story. The final reckoning was not just an end, but a promise of a new, brighter dawn. Life was as predictable as a routine dental checkup until today. My name's Jenny, your average tooth fairy who trades in molars for money, except that I work with state-of-the-art equipment in a swanky downtown clinic. My husband, Mark, is pretty much the academic type, graying at the temples and all. He lectured in the halls I once roamed as a student, though we never swapped anything more than a hello back then. It was only after my cap and gown were tucked away that we started sharing dinners, and before you knew it, vows. You could say we lived a standard, married with no kids, just a couple of lazy goldfish life. Until today. Exhausted, slipping out of my work shoes, I saw them, divorce papers, as stark and chilling as an extracted wisdom tooth, lying beside a note on a coffee table that had seen better days, his handwriting, no doubt. Grimacing, I picked up the note, his words punched me in the gut harder than any root canal ever would. "Jenny, I'm tired. Tired of the humdrum, of papers, of people. I need silence, not the kind we got on Sunday mornings, but the deep kind that you only find away from civilization. Consider this my path to becoming a nobody, to finding some darn peace. Mark." My hands trembled, the note nearly crumpling in my grip. No dramatic outburst, shock does that to you. I uncapped one of the pens that was always scattered around and scribbled on the back of some grocery receipt, the only paper in immediate reach, then dialed Mark, heart drumming a harsh beat against my ribs. The line clicked, and after what seemed like a year, his familiar, now distant voice answered. "Jenny? Mark. What's this about becoming a nobody, huh? You dumping our years together like last week's trash? Jenny, you're not getting it. I can't. I don't want to. It's not you, it's..." "Cut the crap, Mark. You leave a note? Papers? Just like that?" My voice rose as I gripped the phone like it was a lifeline. "Where are you?" There was a pause, a silence that spoke volumes. "Somewhere you can't find me. Somewhere I can be alone." Alone? And what am I supposed to do, huh? Just sit tight and smile while you play hermit? Jenny, please. No, you listen. You can't just decide you're bored, Anne. Bored isn't the word, Jenny. I need something else, something different. What? Silence? You want silence, buy earplugs. But you don't just get to check out. I spat the words out as if they were sour. Jenny, please try to understand. Oh, I understand, all right. Understood loud and clear, Professor. You've made your point. Enjoy your bloody peace then. The line went dead with a finality that echoed in the now too quiet room. The note lay there, staring up at me with its life-altering news, and I was left to figure out if I was to press on with the painful extraction of Mark from my life or root around in the mess for a sliver of hope. It seemed I had more than just teeth to pull. The clinic reeked of strong antiseptic. Where it used to put me at ease, now, it just stirred the pot of my mind, brimming with gossip. Mark, my ex, gone puff, just like that. And the fact that everyone wouldn't shut up about it was getting under my skin. The phone was buzzing again. It never eased up. I knew without looking it was more of the same nosy folks prying for details. Sam's Dental, how may I help you? I answered, using the clinic's name to avoid personal questions. Hey, it's Lizzie from math department. We heard about Mark. You holding up okay? I sighed. Yeah, Lizzie, I'm doing my job. Anything else? I mean, it's just weird, right? Mark's such an urban guy. She pried, digging for dirt. It's his choice, I snapped, a bit more sharply than intended. Sorry, it's just been a rough day. I could almost hear her shrug through the phone. Sure, just checking in. You know how it is here, we're all a bit nosy. The clinic was quieter than usual. I could almost hear the whispers bleeding through the walls. Patients eyed me with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity as I walked through the hall. I needed a break from the staring and the rumors. I found myself in the staff room with Rosa, the receptionist, who was always blunt as a spoon. She was digging through her locker, the metal door screeching like nails on a chalkboard. So, he left you the papers then disappeared, huh? Rosa didn't mince her words. That's about the size of it, I muttered, pouring myself a coffee. She leaned against the lockers, arching an eyebrow. You sign M? Yeah. Savage. Rosa shook her head. Man's got style, give him that. I couldn't help but laugh, leave it to Rosa to call a disappearing act stylish. Back in my office, the nice and tidy one with diplomas on the wall, the phone rang again. It was the one face I didn't mind showing up in my caller ID, Angela, the closest thing I'd had to a sister since forever. Girl, how you just gonna let him punk you like that? No hello, no how are you, just Angela in all her glory. He didn't punk me, Ange. I signed the papers, that was my choice. And you just gonna roll over and play dead? There's nothing to fight for. I'm done and dusted with him. There was a pause. I knew Angela's wheels were turning. Fine, she said. But this isn't gonna fly. We're going out tonight. You need to blow off some steam, or you'll go nuts. I wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. Besides, it beat listening to the whispers and rumors that looped like a bad soundtrack in my mind. The hours ticked by, filled with teeth cleaning and dodging personal questions. By the time my last patient left, I was ready to peel out of there like a bat out of hell. Angela was waiting for me at the local dive, the kind of place where the beer was cold, and no one gave two hoots about your personal drama. I walked in and spotted her straight away, waving enthusiastically. What's kicking, chicken? She greeted me, sliding over a glass of something strong. Hey, Ange. Just the usual circus. I gulped down the drink, welcoming the burn. We talked, or rather, she talked, and I tried to forget. It worked, mostly. The clink of glasses and Angela's hearty laughter were a good combo. It was late when we said our goodbyes, just outside the bar. The night was dark, the wind was cold, and once inside my car, I realized something. I felt lighter. Like dropping off a heavy suitcase I'd been lugging around. The years had rolled by like series of silent movie frames. That old bitterness about Mark, it was more or less a faint echo these days. I mean, life had to move on, right? I shifted gears somewhere along the line, and now, well, now things were steady. You could say I was living the quiet life, except for the occasional siren wail, thanks to my new husband, Tom, the cop. Tom was good people. A chuckle in a uniform, you might say. He had this knack, you know, for turning a crappy day around with just a smirk and a joke that was so bad it circled back to being good. Then there was Joey, our little typhoon in toddler form. 3 years old and already the boss of the household. If joy came in human form, it was him, no contest. One pretty normal Tuesday, I was in the kitchen, fighting with the wrapper of a macaroni box. That's when Tom ambled in, his uniform looking like it had seen better days. He planted a kiss on my cheek, still sparking a little zing even after all these years, and ruffled Joey's hair. "Hey, bud, how was your day with Mom?" he asked Joey, who was smashing a toy truck into the linoleum. Joey's answer was a happy shriek and more enthusiastic truck smashing. "I'm starting to think he's going to follow in your footsteps," I said, finally getting the box open and emptying it into the simmering water. Tom's beeper suddenly blared, ruining the moment. He checked it and grimaced. "Looks like the station needs me. Some brawl at the bar downtown." "Geez, Tom. Stay safe, will you?" "Always," he said, standing up but with Joey still clinging to him. He handed our son back to me. "Gotta run. I'll try not to wake you too when I come back." After he left, it was just Joey and me and the hum of the refrigerator. Joey babbled something about Dada, and I couldn't help but feel a twang in my chest. Sure, I had Tom and Joey, a solid job, a roof over my head. But sometimes, when Tom's cruiser pulled out of the driveway, or when Joey's laughter filled a room, I'd remember I once had a different life, a different partner in the dance. "Come on, champ," I told Joey. "Let's tackle that mountain of blocks like we're the king and queen of the castle." And as I built flimsy towers for Joey to knock over, laughing all the while, I realized I'd turned over more than just a new leaf. I'd started a whole new chapter. And you know what? It looked pretty damn good from where I was sitting. As the flat screen on the wall spat out images with quiet contempt, there was Mark, my ex, hunched over on a patch of green. The grass was probably crumpled under him, matching his wrinkled linen shirt. I hadn't seen him in years, not since he traded our life for silence and dirt paths. Those journalists were eyeing him like he was a prize pig at the fair, each waiting for their turn. Mark fiddled with strands of his wild beard as he leaned into the microphone. His voice, still with that calm know-it-all tone, itched in my ears. "Yeah, that's right," he was saying. "I had to leave because of her. She's got this heart, steeled over, you know? Cold. And cheating? She was a regular at that game. Took my piece, she did. That's why you find me here, away from all that mess." The air in the dental clinic was colder than usual, or maybe it was just my mood darkening everything around me since that darned news report aired. I slammed my locker shut, trying to shove away the clutter of whispers and side glances that had infested the office like bad breath. It wasn't just the sterile smell of mint and disinfectant lingering, it was the stench of gossip. Thanks to my ex, Mark, I was the new plaque everyone wanted to scrape off. "Hey, you done early?" Gina, one of the hygienists, leaned against the door frame, balancing a stack of patient folders. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were skirting around mine, wary. Too wary. "Yeah," I grunted, collecting my stuff. "Need to clear my head. This place is looking kinda stuffy." She snorted, a crude sound that was music to my irritated ears. "Looks the same to me. Though, you could cut the tension with dental floss." I offered a half smile, but didn't meet her eyes. "Maybe some people got cavities in their personalities," I replied, voice tight. As I walked out, I couldn't shake off the prying eyes. Reaching my car, I spotted Tom waiting for me, arms crossed, leant on the hood. His usual sunny exterior was clouded over. "How's it going, Jenny?" he asked as I approached, trying to light up the dimming day. "Like a root canal gone wrong," I replied, my keys jingled with a shake of my hand. Tom pushed himself off the car. "You know what I think? Screw him. He's talking crap." "That's one word for it," I said, opening the car door. Tom detoured it, his stance stubborn. "We shouldn't let this nonsense get between us. You've got me, Joey, and Angela. It's their problem if they believe that liar." The sincerity in his voice was a soothing balm, but I was too riled up to take it in fully. "Sure, but try telling that to the Hyena Club in there." He grabbed my hand, his grip firm. "Listen, let's grab Joey, hit the pizza place, and just chill. All right?" I took a breath, absorbing the offer. "You always know how to patch things up, cop hubby," I said with a tired smile. "And don't forget it." He flashed a grin, the kind that could make a dentist proud. But before we could continue, a call cut through our bubble. "Mommy." Joey came sprinting across the parking lot, his babysitter trailing behind. The little guy wrapped around my legs, a toddler tornado. "Hey champ," I said, lifting him up. "You ready for some pizza?" "Pizza, pizza," Joey chanted, any worry about the day's drama lost in his innocent cheer. I glanced back at the clinic once Joey and Tom were settled in the car, a cold laugh escaping me. To hell with them. Let's go have some real family time. Tom revved the engine, a mischievous spark lighting his eyes. "No looking back, babe, that's the rule." "Got it, boss," I said, and as we drove off, Joey's giggles, the only sound I cared about, I felt the heaviness shed bit by bit. It was just another crappy chapter in the novel of life, one that I'd darn well write myself. No ex-husband was going to taint my reflection, not anymore. I was still reeling from another day's work when she cornered me. Jasmine, the new intern, was kind of edgy since the day she stumbled in, but today, she was all jittery. So there I was, peeling off my gloves, and she comes up real close, smelling like antiseptic and fear. "Doc, I gotta talk to you," Jasmine said, her voice as shaky as a beaten-up washing machine. "What's up?" I was already thinking about the pile of paperwork waiting to claw at my evening. "It's about Mark. I heard the other nurses saying you were married to that guy." Her eyes darted around the room as if afraid the walls would grow ears. "Yeah, what about him?" I tossed the gloves and reached for my coffee, gone cold hours ago. "I was a student when he was teaching. He wasn't just giving lectures, if you know what I mean." Her voice took a dive, like someone had yanked the volume down. "He did stuff. Bad stuff." I felt something raw and bitter twist in my gut. "Stuff?" I asked, hoping for some vague rumor I could dismiss. He was handsy, you know, with me. And with others. We were just a bunch of scared kids, and he liked that power. Jasmine spat the words out like they were poison. My grip on the mug tightened. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw him on TV, acting all holy and repentant. I couldn't stomach it. I threatened to expose him, and then he vanished." "That coward," I hissed. The mug in my hand cracked, coffee seeping through the spiderweb crevices to drip onto the floor. "He told everyone he left 'cause of you and some grand spiritual quest. But that's bull. He fled 'cause I had proof of what he did. The texts, the creepy late-night calls." "That's a big claim, Jasmine," I managed to say, my throat dry as sawdust. "You got any of that proof on you?" "Yep," she said, a grim satisfaction in her tone. She hauled out her phone, a cheap thing with a cracked screen, and flicked through messages until she shoved it under my nose. There it was, in black and white. A whole sordid history laid out in texts and emails. I read, every word a punch in the gut. When I was done, I looked up. "I'm sorry, for what it's worth." thank you for coming forward. We gonna do something about it? She asked, tough as nails now. Absolutely, I said, feeling a flame of anger kindling inside me. And as we plotted revenge on the man I once called a husband, the man who had fooled us all, I felt a grim kind of satisfaction. This was going to be messy, but hell, it was about time some dirt got cleaned up around here. I stood there in the clearing, staring at the man I once called my husband. There he was, Professor Mark, looking every bit the wilderness prophet with a graying beard and a flock of adoring followers. His eyes flashed over me, a brief flash of recognition before his face settled into that infuriating calm. Jenny? What the hell are you doing here? His voice had that familiar sharp edge. Just wanted a chat, Mark. A cozy catch-up between exes. Never thought I'd find you playing guru, I said, squinting at the half-naked followers prancing around. He crossed his arms, a smirk playing on his lips. To what do I owe the pleasure? I cut to the chase. That trash talk on TV, really, Mark? Cruel and unfaithful. You sure have a way with fiction. He shrugged, the same old nonchalant shrug that drove me up the wall. Needed a story, didn't I? Playing the victim pays the bills. I couldn't help but laugh, bitter and sharp. And here I thought you ran off to find inner peace. His audience looked on, starving for some drama. He was unfazed. Gotta give the people what they want. Yeah, but at my expense? I felt that familiar anger bubbling. And there's another thing, about Jasmine. His face lost color for a second, but then he barked out a laugh. Jasmine? That kid had nothing on me. His nerve was something else. Without breaking eye contact, I slid out my phone. Actually, she did. He squinted at the screen as I flicked through the messages Jasmine had sent me. Threats, creepy come-ons, the whole 9 yards. Mark tried to grab the phone out of my hands, but then Tom appeared next to me. The message of protection couldn't have been clearer if he was wearing a flashing sign. It made me feel safe and furious all at once that I needed it. Look, everyone, Mark's voice broke through the silence, all smooth and soothing like one of those late-night radio hosts. This is all a big misunderstanding, alright? My ex here, she's got it in for me, that's all this is. I could feel my jaw clench at his words, but I kept my cool. I wasn't about to let him get to me. Not this time. Tom's voice, gravel mixed with thunder, growled next to me. Cut the crap, Mark. We all know what you did. And it's all coming out today. Mark's followers looked from him to me and back again, like they were watching a tennis match. Just then, the wail of the sirens cut through Mark's phony serenity like a chainsaw through butter. His face drained of color, which on him, looked almost impressive. Please, Mark was kneeling now, the guru luster gone, replaced by sweaty desperation. You can't do this. Think of my reputation. Tom snorted, stepping closer to Mark so that the kneeling man had to crane his neck just to keep eye contact. Reputation? What about the lies about Jenny? What about all those messages, huh? What about Jasmine's story, you think that doesn't count for nothing? The game's up, buddy. Mark looked up at us, his eyes flicking from my snarl to Tom's stony glare, and then to the uniformed officers coming up behind us. There was a moment, a single moment, where he looked like he might run. But Mark didn't run. He just sat there on his knees, looking up. Looking like he knew that the tides had indeed turned. The followers were mumbling among themselves now, backing away from their fallen idol, their murmurs building like waves before a storm. Then, one of the cops stepped forward, flipping open a notebook. Are you Professor Mark Thompson? He asked, his tone neutral. Mark just nodded, his voice squeaking like a rusty hinge. Yes, sir. The officer glanced at me, then at Tom. We're going to need to take him in, he said, as if asking for permission. Tom just gave a short nod, and I felt my heart kick up a notch. This was it. Mark shot one last desperate look at his disciples. I'm being set up, he yelled, hoping for sympathy, salvation. But seeing the truth staring back at him from the scattered glances of the crowd was the nail in the coffin of any sympathy he hoped for. The cop cuffed him with all the flair of someone clocking in for a routine shift. "Mark Thompson, you are under arrest." The clink of the cuffs was like the sweetest music, and that's when I knew, for sure. The tides hadn't just turned, they'd flipped, completely. Tom wrapped his arm around me as we watched Mark being led away. The scene felt almost surreal. I turned to Tom, and his nod told me everything. We were on the same team, and we were strong. I was standing outside and breathing in the fresh air. The phone in my pocket started its own dance, buzzing with incoming calls, no doubt apologies and awkward backtracking. I had no interest in their sorry words. "I told you so" wasn't my style. The door to the clinic swung open, and Jasmine walked out. "Hey, Doc," she said, with a grin that seemed out of place, but right for someone who'd just shrugged off a weight they'd been dragging around. "Is it true? They got him?" "Yep," I said, feeling a sharp sense of satisfaction at her smile. "It's true." "Good. It's about damn time," she said, her voice firm. I could hear some of my own resolve echoed in her tone. Jasmine had courage, coming forward, speaking out. "It's not easy, facing ghosts." "He won't be seeing the outside of a jail cell for a long while," Tom said. "Good riddance," she shot back, no hint of sympathy for my ex-husband. I couldn't help smiling at her spunk. "You did good," I said. "Really good." Tom's radio crackled with police chatter, but he ignored it, his attention on today's victory. "You gonna celebrate?" Jasmine asked. Her shift was obviously over, and she was all but bouncing on her heels, ready to let relief transition into something warmer, more joyful. "Mom's got Joey," I answered. "So, yeah, we'll celebrate." Quietly. Jasmine nodded, then left, her steps light. "Let's go home, Tom," I said after a moment. "Let's go be with our son." "Nothing I'd rather do," he agreed, and we turned away, my hand finding his, strength in our combined grip, ready to face whatever came next, together. I'm Irene, navigating life at 30 with a mix of web design and motherhood. Our family nucleus was simple: me, my husband Mike, and our 2-year-old sunshine, Danny. Our world was comfortably wrapped within the walls of our home, which stood as a testament to the life we built together. Mike worked for my dad's company, a job he was proud of, and I carved pixels into designs from my home studio. Our routine was pleasantly mundane until one evening at my parents' house, where family dinners were more than just meals. They were gatherings punctuated by discussions, laughter, and, sometimes, life-changing announcements. "So, I've been thinking," my dad began, his voice commanding the room's attention. He was a self-made man, a pillar of wisdom in business suits. "We're expanding the company. There's a new branch opening in the neighboring city, and I want Mike to take the lead on this." Mike, who had always admired my dad, perked up immediately. His eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and determination. "Mr. Thompson, that's a fantastic opportunity. I'm all in." I felt a surge of pride and excitement. "That's wonderful news. We should all move there for the project duration. It's just a few months, and it'll be like a little adventure," I said, already envisioning our temporary life in a new city. Unexpectedly, Mike hesitated, casting a glance that didn't quite reach his usual confidence. "Actually, Irene, it might be better if you and Danny stay here. Moving could be a hassle for the little guy." His words hit me unexpectedly, like a cold splash of reality in our warm, cozy life. "But Mike, I thought we were in this together. And it's not like we have to uproot our lives. I can work from anywhere, and it would be a nice change for Danny." My dad nodded in agreement, his voice echoing my thoughts. "Mike, Irene has a point. The family should stick together in such times. And Irene's job gives her that flexibility." Mike seemed to be caught off guard, a nervous chuckle escaping him. "I was just joking. Of course, you both should come along. But that joke didn't sit right with me. It lingered in the air, an uninvited guest at our family dinner. The evening progressed with Dad and Mike diving into the logistics of the new business venture, but my mind was stuck on Mike's initial reaction. Why the hesitation? Why the reluctance? Later that night, after tucking Danny into bed, I found myself sitting across from Mike in our living room. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind. "Mike, about dinner tonight," I started, my voice a blend of confusion and concern. "You really caught me off guard, suggesting that Danny and I shouldn't join you. Is there something on your mind?" He looked up from his phone, meeting my gaze for the first time since we sat down. "Irene, I didn't mean to upset you. It's just that setting up a new branch will be demanding. I thought it'd be easier for you to stay put, avoid the stress of moving." I leaned forward, searching his face for the familiar comfort. "But we've always faced challenges together. That's what we do. Why would this time be any different?" Mike sighed, putting his phone down. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "You're right, we do. And we will. I guess I was just overthinking it. It was a silly thought, nothing more." His words were meant to reassure, but they hung heavy in the room, a reminder that something in our equation had shifted, however slightly. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs just when you think you've got it all figured out. Our little family was on the brink of a new adventure, or so I thought, until Danny, our 2-year-old bundle of joy, decided to rewrite our plans. It started with a mild fever, nothing too alarming at first, but it quickly escalated. I remember holding Danny in my arms, feeling his little body burning up as I dialed our family doctor. "Dr. Jacobs, Danny's fever isn't coming down." "I'm really worried," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. After a thorough checkup, Dr. Jacobs' expression was serious. "Irene, I'm afraid it's more than just a common cold. Danny needs rest and cannot travel for a while. Moving to a new city is out of the question right now." The news hit me like a ton of bricks. I called Mike that evening, the weight of uncertainty heavy in my voice. "Mike, Danny's sick. The doctor advised against traveling. We can't join you for now." On the other end, there was a pause before Mike responded. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Oh, is it serious? Well, that's okay, Irene. He needs to get better. We can manage." Something about his response didn't sit right with me. There was an undertone of relief, perhaps even contentment, that Danny and I wouldn't be joining him. It gnawed at me, that unsettling feeling of doubt. The weeks that followed were tough. Danny's illness turned out to be a stubborn infection that took its time healing. My days and nights merged into a blur of caregiving, leaving little room for anything else. Mike's calls became infrequent, and when he did call, his words felt rehearsed, lacking the warmth I was used to. "Everything's okay here, Irene. Just busy with work. How's Danny?" I'd update him, hoping for more engagement, but the conversations were brief and perfunctory. "He's getting better, slowly. We miss you, Mike." "Yeah, I miss you guys too," he'd reply, but it sounded hollow, as if he was saying it out of obligation rather than feeling. The distance was growing, not just in miles, but in our connection. It felt like Mike was slipping away, retreating into a world I wasn't part of. One evening, after a particularly short and unsatisfying call with Mike, I sat in the living room long after Danny had fallen asleep. The silence of the house echoed my thoughts. Was this what our life was going to be now? Mike distant and preoccupied, and me, alone, holding down the fort? Days turned into weeks, and the distance between Mike and me felt more than just miles apart. It was as if he was slowly drifting away, becoming a stranger. His calls, once filled with laughter and warmth, were now just formal check-ins. One evening, as I was putting Danny to bed, my phone buzzed. It was Mike. "Hey, how's Danny doing?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual tenderness. "He's better, still recovering," I replied, hoping to stir some emotion in him. "Work's crazy here," he said, sounding distracted. I sat down in the living room, the silence engulfing me. "Mike, we barely talk these days. Is everything okay with you? You seem different." There was a pause on the line. "Different? No, I'm just really busy, Irene. You know how it is starting up a new branch." I tried to keep the conversation going, to bridge the growing gap. "I understand you're busy, but it feels like you're not just physically away. It's like I don't know you anymore." He let out a sigh. "Irene, you're overthinking it. It's just stress, that's all. Once things settle down here, it'll be better." But his reassurances did little to ease my growing concerns. His words felt empty, devoid of the connection we once shared. Weeks passed, and Mike's brief return home did little to quell my fears. He was physically present but emotionally distant. He spent most of his time either working on his laptop or engrossed in his phone. One night, I decided to confront him. "Mike, we need to talk. You've been distant ever since you took this new job. Is there something you're not telling me?" He looked up from his phone, his expression a mix of annoyance and surprise. "Irene, why do you keep saying that? I'm right here." "But you're not really. You're always on your phone or laptop. It's like you're here, but your mind is somewhere else," I said, my voice tinged with frustration. Mike closed his laptop with a sigh. "Look, Irene, I've got a lot on my plate right now. The new branch, the pressures from your dad, it's a lot to handle. I'm just trying to do my best." I nodded, trying to understand. "I get that, Mike, but we're a team, remember? If there's something bothering you, you can talk to me." He shook his head, a half smile on his face. "There's nothing to talk about, Irene. I'm just busy, that's all. You're making a big deal out of nothing." But it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like a chasm was forming between us, one that I couldn't bridge, no matter how hard I tried. The day started routinely enough, with the familiar hum of my computer and the soft breathing of Danny during his nap. I was deep in thought, maneuvering through the complexities of a web design project, when a knock at the door jolted me back to reality. Opening it, I found myself face to face with a stranger, his eyes weary yet determined. "Can I help you?" I asked, curiosity mingling with a hint of apprehension. "Yes, you're Irene, Mike's wife, right?" "I'm David." His voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of nervousness. I nodded, still unsure where this was going. "That's me. What is this about?" David took a deep breath, as if bracing himself. "I believe your husband, Mike, is having an affair with my wife." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. "That's impossible," I stammered, disbelief clouding my thoughts. "Mike wouldn't do that. There's got to be some mistake." "I thought the same at first," David admitted, reaching into his pocket. "But then I found this." He handed me his phone, his hand shaking slightly. The photos displayed on the screen were heart-wrenching. There was Mike, undeniably him, in a series of intimate moments with a woman I didn't recognize. They were laughing, embracing, their closeness leaving no room for doubt. I felt my world spin as I handed back the phone. "Why are you showing me this?" My voice cracked, barely a whisper under the weight of my crumbling reality. David's gaze was sympathetic yet firm. "Because you deserve to know the truth. And I think we should do something about it." A mixture of emotions surged through me, anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. "What do you mean, do something about it?" He leaned against the door frame, his posture suggesting a man who had nothing left to lose. "I have a plan. A way to confront them, to bring this out into the open. I can't just let this go, and I don't think you should either." My mind raced. Part of me wanted to shut the door and pretend this never happened, but another, stronger part knew I couldn't live with the uncertainty. What kind of plan? We need more evidence, something undeniable. I propose we catch them together, in the act, David explained, his voice laced with a mix of pain and resolve. The idea was daunting, yet it resonated with the part of me that craved closure. How would we do that? I know where and when they meet. If you're willing, we can confront them, together, he proposed, his eyes searching mine for a decision. The thought of facing Mike in such a scenario was terrifying, yet the need for the truth, for some semblance of control in the chaos, was overpowering. Okay, I'm in. I need to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As David left, I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of the decision I had just made. The path ahead was fraught with pain and uncertainty, but I knew there was no turning back. The truth was out there, and I had to face it, for my sake and for Danny's. The reality of what David and I were about to do hit me as we sat in the dimly lit apartment next door to Mike's. We were there to unveil the truth, using the thin walls to our advantage. The apartment, ironically provided by my father's company for Mike, was now the stage for uncovering his betrayal. David was setting up a small recording device, his hands steady but his eyes betraying a storm of emotions. Can't believe it's come to this, he muttered, more to himself than to me. I nodded, feeling a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Neither can I. But we need to know, right? As we waited, the silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and questions. Then, the sound of a door opening next door broke the stillness. My heart skipped a beat, and I saw David tense up. That's them, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We moved closer to the wall, straining to hear. The voices were muffled at first, but then clearer. It was Mike, his laughter unmistakable, mingling with a woman's voice, his mistress. I clenched my fists, fighting back a surge of emotions. The intimacy in their voices was like a knife twisting in my heart. Are you getting this? David asked, his voice tight with anger. I nodded, holding the recorder close to the wall. Yes, it's all being recorded. The sounds from the other side of the wall continued, laughter, conversation, and then unmistakably more intimate noises. It was excruciating to sit there, hearing Mike betray our family so blatantly. But amid the heartache, there was a growing sense of resolve. We were gathering the evidence we needed, undeniable proof of their betrayal. After what felt like an eternity, the noises ceased, and a heavy silence fell over our makeshift surveillance spot. David and I exchanged a look, a mix of sorrow and determination in our eyes. We have what we need, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Now we confront them. David nodded, his jaw set. Let's do it now. No point waiting. As we stood up, I felt a strange sense of empowerment mixed with dread. The life I had known with Mike was over, and confronting him was the first step into a new, uncertain future. We need to catch them off guard, David said as we moved toward the door. I agreed, clutching the recorder like a lifeline. Let's go. It's time they faced the consequences. Stepping out of the apartment, the weight of the moment settled on my shoulders. We were about to face the people who had turned our lives upside down. The confrontation would be painful, but necessary. David and I stood in the dimly lit corridor outside Mike's apartment, our hearts racing with a mix of anxiety and determination. The plan was simple, but bold. David would pretend to be a courier, a ruse to ensure Mike would open the door. David knocked firmly, announcing loudly enough to be heard through the door, "Delivery." We heard footsteps approaching from inside. The door swung open, and there stood Mike, his face transitioning from annoyance to shock as his eyes landed on me. "Irene? What the hell are you doing here?" I took a deep breath, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside. "We need to talk, Mike. Can I come in?" Behind Mike, the mistress, a young woman with a startled expression, stood frozen. Reluctantly, Mike stepped aside, allowing us entry. The room felt tense, charged with unspoken accusations and fear. Without mincing words, David confronted Mike. "We know about the affair, Mike. You can drop the act." Mike's reaction was a mix of defensiveness and scorn. This is nothing. She seduced me. I was just caught up." His mistress, now visibly shaken, retorted, "What? No, you were as much in this as I was." Ignoring her, Mike turned to me, trying to downplay the situation. "Irene, listen, this isn't what it looks like." I couldn't hold back any longer. "Not what it looks like?" "I heard everything, Mike. We have recordings." Mike glanced at the recording device in David's hand, his face turning pale. "Recordings? Irene, you've got to understand." "There's nothing to understand," I cut him off, my voice rising in anger. "You betrayed our family, Mike. You betrayed me and Danny." He started to say something but stopped, realizing the gravity of his situation. "Irene, please," Mike's voice trailed off as he fell to his knees, a pathetic figure of desperation. "Forgive me, I made a mistake. Please, don't tell your father about this." I looked down at him, feeling a mix of pity and revulsion. "You think I can just forgive and forget? I'm going to demand compensation for this betrayal. And yes, I will tell my father. He deserves to know the kind of man you really are." Mike's face crumpled in despair, but there was no going back. The trust we had was shattered beyond repair. David, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "You're going to pay for this, Mike. Both of you." The mistress, now crying, looked completely overwhelmed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." As we left the apartment, leaving Mike and his mistress to their own messy reality, I felt a strange sense of closure. It was painful and heart-wrenching, but necessary. The confrontation was over, and with it, a chapter of my life had ended. Stepping out into the brisk evening air, the weight of what had just transpired in Mike's apartment hung heavily over me. David and I walked in silence to a nearby park bench. The noise of the city around us felt distant, muffled by the shock and turmoil churning inside. David was the first to break the silence. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Irene. But at least now you know the truth." I nodded, feeling numb. "Yes, the truth." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "What are you going to do now?" He looked down, his hands clenched tightly. "I need to think. There's a lot to process. But one thing is clear, I can't stay with her after this." "I understand," I said softly. The reality of my own situation was beginning to sink in. I need to start planning for a life without Mike. For Danny's sake. David looked at me, empathy in his eyes. "If you need anything, any help, just let me know." I managed a weak smile. "Thank you, David. I appreciate it." We sat there for a while longer, lost in our own thoughts, before parting ways. As I walked back to my parents' house, where Danny was staying, the magnitude of the situation hit me. My marriage was over, and the life I had known was shattered. When I arrived, my parents immediately sensed something was wrong. "Irene, what happened? You look upset," my mom asked, concern etched on her face. I sighed, not sure where to begin. "Mom, Dad, I found out Mike has been having an affair." The room went silent. My dad's expression hardened. "Are you sure?" I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "Yes, I'm sure. I heard them, and I have recordings." My mom reached out, taking my hand. "Oh, Irene, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to file for divorce," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I can't be with him after this. It's over." My dad, always the protector, spoke up. "He won't get away with this. I'll make sure of that. And you and Danny will always have a home here." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, grateful for their support. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you both. The final chapter of my marriage to Mike was written in a lawyer's office, amidst a sea of paperwork and legal jargon. The divorce process was grueling but necessary. I fought hard, with my lawyer by my side, to ensure that Danny and I would have the financial security we needed. The court granted me alimony and compensation for Mike's betrayal, a small solace in the wake of our shattered life. Meanwhile, David, the man who had been thrust into my life by our shared misfortune, also finalized his divorce. His wife, once living a life of luxury, now faced a starkly different reality. She had to trade her affluent lifestyle for a job as a saleswoman in a retail store, a harsh consequence of her actions. As for Mike, the repercussions of his infidelity were far-reaching. My father, once a mentor and supporter, was ruthless in his response. He not only fired Mike from the company, but also made it clear that he would use his influence to prevent Mike from securing a position in any reputable firm. The man who once had a promising career now juggled two menial jobs, struggling to make ends meet. Life after the divorce was a journey of healing and rediscovery for me. I focused on raising Danny, ensuring that the upheaval in our lives didn't dim his bright, innocent spirit. Watching him grow, laugh, and explore the world was a balm to my bruised heart. My work as a web designer provided not just a financial lifeline, but also a welcome distraction. I threw myself into my projects, finding joy and fulfillment in creating and designing. It was a reminder that despite the chaos, I still had control over some aspects of my life. My parents were my rock during this time. They provided unwavering support, offering a safe haven for Danny and me. "You're stronger than you realize, Irene," my dad would often say. And as time passed, I began to believe him. In the quiet moments, often after I had put Danny to bed, I would reflect on the tumultuous journey. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it was slowly being replaced by a newfound strength and independence. I had navigated through the darkest of times and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but certainly stronger. As I closed the chapter on a painful part of my life, I opened a new one, filled with possibilities and the promise of a fresh start. My journey was not over, it was merely taking a new path, one that I was ready to travel with hope and determination. My name is Elaine. I'm a 56-year-old doctor at our local hospital, a profession that has been both my calling and my refuge, especially since becoming a widow 2 decades ago. My life, outside of the hospital, revolves around my only son, Thomas, a 30-year-old who recently told me about his serious relationship with a girl named Clara. He described her in such glowing terms that I was both curious and eager to meet her. So, I invited them over for dinner. The day of their visit, I was a bundle of nerves. I wanted everything to be perfect. I prepared my signature dishes, a golden baked chicken, sweet milk pudding, and a hearty salad with chicken eggs, amongst others. I hoped these familiar comforts would make Clara feel welcome. When they arrived, Clara was noticeably thin and somewhat pale, but I brushed off my initial concern, attributing it to nerves, or perhaps a dietary choice I wasn't yet aware of. I greeted them warmly. "Welcome, Clara. It's so lovely to finally meet you," I said with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Elaine," Clara replied politely, though her voice was barely above a whisper. We settled in the living room for a bit before moving to the dining room. I could sense Thomas's excitement as he introduced Clara to my home. However, the atmosphere shifted drastically once we sat down for dinner. Clara's eyes widened in shock when she saw the baked chicken on the table. Her face contorted into a look of disgust as she exclaimed, "I can't believe you're serving this. I'm a hard vegetarian. I don't eat such things." Thomas turned beet red. "Mom, I'm so sorry, I should have told you about Clara's diet," he stammered. Clara cut in sharply, "Thomas, you're such a fool. How could you not mention something so important?" I was taken aback by her harsh words. It was uncomfortable to see Thomas being scolded like that. Quickly trying to remedy the situation, I offered, "Clara, I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. Perhaps you'd like to try some of the other dishes? Do they have any animal products? Eggs? Milk?" Clara interrogated, her tone accusatory. "Yes, they do," I replied, feeling a growing sense of unease. She slammed her hand on the table, pushing away the dishes. "I can't even stand the sight of them." Clara stood up abruptly and stormed out of the house, leaving Thomas to mutter an apology before running after her. Several months after the disastrous dinner, Thomas and Clara's wedding day arrived. Despite my reservations about Clara, I put on a brave face for my son's sake. The wedding, as I'd been forewarned, was entirely vegetarian. I had never been to a wedding like this before, and neither had most of our family. As I walked into the venue, I couldn't help but feel out of place. The decorations were beautiful, but the atmosphere was unfamiliar. Clara's friends, also vegetarians, mingled amongst themselves, discussing the virtues of their dietary choices. My sister, Martha, leaned over to me and whispered, "Elaine, have you seen the menu? I can't pronounce half of these dishes." I smiled wryly. "Just go with it, Martha. It's Thomas's day." The ceremony was lovely, but the reception was where things got interesting. The array of vegetarian dishes was certainly exotic. My relatives poked at their food with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. During the meal, my brother-in-law, George, a man never known for his tact, called a waiter over. "Excuse me, son, is there any chance we could get a steak or something? Just a small one?" The waiter, trying to remain polite, responded, "I'm sorry, sir. The menu is strictly vegetarian as per the couple's request." George grunted, "Well, I guess it's salad for dinner then." Despite the unfamiliar food, I tried to focus on the positive. Thomas looked genuinely happy, albeit a bit thinner than I remembered. As the evening progressed, I observed Clara. She was the center of attention among her friends, laughing and seeming in her element. Yet, there was an edge to her laughter, a sharpness that made me uneasy. A few days after the wedding, Thomas came to visit me alone. His appearance startled me. He had lost more weight and looked tired. "Thomas, are you all right? You've lost so much weight," I said, concern evident in my voice. He sighed, looking down at his hands. "Mom, Clara's been, well, she's put me on a strict vegetarian diet too. Says it's non-negotiable." I was taken aback. "But, Thomas, your job is physically demanding. You need a balanced diet." He shrugged helplessly. "I know, Mom, but I want to make her happy. It's been hard adjusting." I watched him leave later, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. Clara's influence over him was more profound than I had feared. My son, once so vibrant and full of life, now seemed a shadow of his former self. After several sleepless nights, filled with worry about Thomas, I decided it was time to take action. I couldn't stand by and watch my son's health deteriorate. With a heavy heart, I picked up the phone to call Clara, Thomas's wife. I hoped that as a doctor, I could express my concerns in a way that would resonate with her. "Hello, Clara. It's Elaine, Thomas's mother. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," I began, my voice as warm and friendly as I could muster. "What do you want, Elaine?" Clara's voice was cold, distant. "I'm calling about Thomas," I said cautiously. "I've noticed he's lost quite a bit of weight and seems very tired lately. I'm worried it could be related to his new diet." Clara let out a sigh, audibly annoyed. "Look, Elaine, Thomas is perfectly fine. He's just adapting to a healthier way of eating. You're overreacting." "I understand your perspective, Clara, but as a doctor, I see signs of nutritional deficiencies in Thomas. He works a physically demanding job, and a strict vegetarian diet without proper planning can lead to health issues," I explained, trying to keep the conversation civil and factual. Elaine, I don't need a lecture on nutrition from you. We've done our research. Thomas is on a balanced vegetarian diet, and that's that. You're not a dietitian, Clara retorted sharply. But Clara, there are certain nutrients that are hard to get from a vegetarian diet alone, especially for someone with Thomas's lifestyle. Perhaps we could work together to find a diet that meets his nutritional needs and aligns with your dietary preferences? I suggested, hoping for a compromise. Clara's voice rose in frustration. I'm not interested in your help, Elaine. Thomas is my husband, and we make our decisions together. You need to respect that and stay out of it. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. Clara's unwillingness to even consider my concerns was alarming. Later that day, my sister, Karen, came over. I shared the distressing phone call with her. Karen, I don't know what to do. Clara just shut me down. She wouldn't even listen to my concerns about Thomas, I shared, my hands trembling slightly. Karen, always a source of practical advice, looked thoughtful. Elaine, it's a tough situation. But maybe Thomas needs to come to this realization on his own. Clara obviously has a strong influence on him. I nodded, knowing she was right, yet feeling uneasy. I just can't sit back and watch Thomas suffer. He's always been a bit too accommodating, and now it's affecting his health. Karen reached across the table, squeezing my hand. I know, Elaine. But sometimes stepping back is the only way they learn. Maybe when Thomas sees the toll it's taking on him, he'll make a change. A few days after my futile conversation with Clara, Thomas came to visit me unexpectedly. It was a cold, gray afternoon, the kind that made you want to stay indoors. When I opened the door, the sight of him took my breath away. He looked nothing like the son I knew. His face was drawn and pale, his eyes lacking their usual spark. But it was the scratches on his face that alarmed me the most. Thomas, what happened to you? I exclaimed, ushering him inside. He avoided my gaze, a sign that he was uncomfortable. It's nothing, Mom, just a little argument with Clara. I led him to the living room, my mind racing with worry. Argument? Thomas, she scratched your face. This is serious. He finally looked at me, his eyes weary. I know, Mom. I don't know what to do anymore. I fetched my first aid kit and began treating his scratches gently. Tell me what happened, Thomas. You know you can talk to me. He sighed, a deep, troubled sigh. I went out for a quick bite. I just wanted to eat something more high-calorie and tasty, you know? I went to this cafe and ordered a burger. Clara saw me through the window. She stormed in and made a huge scene. I couldn't hide my shock. A scene? Over a burger? Thomas nodded, looking down at his hands. Yeah, she was screaming about me betraying our lifestyle, our values. She said I was poisoning myself. Then she scratched my face and told me to leave the house. I finished bandaging his face, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. Thomas, this isn't healthy. You can't live like this. Being forced to change your diet and then being attacked for eating a burger? It's not right. He leaned back on the sofa, closing his eyes. I know, Mom. But I love her. I thought I could make this work. I sat beside him, my heart aching for my son. Love shouldn't be this hard, Thomas. It shouldn't hurt like this. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Thomas spoke up. I think I'll stay here tonight, if that's okay. I just need some time to think. Of course, you can stay as long as you need, I replied, trying to offer him a comforting smile. That evening, as I cooked dinner, I kept glancing at Thomas, who was sitting at the kitchen table, lost in thought. I prepared a simple, hearty meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and steamed vegetables. The kind of food I knew he loved. As we ate, I tried to lighten the mood. Remember when you were a kid, and you wouldn't eat anything but chicken nuggets for a week? Thomas managed a small smile. Yeah, I was a picky eater. But I always loved your cooking, Mom. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. You're always welcome here, Thomas. You're my son, and I just want you to be happy and healthy. He squeezed back, a glimmer of the old Thomas in his eyes. Thanks, Mom. I really needed this. The next couple of weeks passed in a blur of worry and sleepless nights. Then, one ordinary Thursday, my world was rocked by a phone call that every parent dreads. It was the hospital. Mrs. Parker, your son Thomas was brought in this morning. He's been in an accident, the voice on the other end said, calm yet impersonal. My heart skipped a beat. Is he all right? What happened? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He's stable now, but he lost consciousness at the wheel. He's lucky, the injuries aren't serious. You can come and see him, the caller replied. I hurried to the hospital, my mind racing with 1,000 fears. When I arrived, I saw Thomas lying in a hospital bed, looking even more pale and thin than before. Thomas, oh my God, are you all right? I gasped, rushing to his side. He managed a weak smile. I'm okay, Mom. Just a bit shaken up. A doctor I knew, Dr. Simmons, came into the room. Elaine, we've given him a thorough checkup. Physically, he's fine, just a few bruises. But his blood tests show signs of malnourishment. It seems he fainted due to low blood sugar. I turned to Thomas, my worry turning into anger. Malnourishment? Thomas, is this because of your diet? Thomas avoided my gaze, nodding slightly. I guess I haven't been eating properly. Clara's been so strict about the diet. I turned to Dr. Simmons. Can we make sure he gets a proper meal here? Something substantial? Of course, Elaine. We'll take care of him, Dr. Simmons assured me. I sat by Thomas's bed, holding his hand. Thomas, this has to stop. You could have been killed. All because of this diet. Thomas sighed, a look of resignation on his face. I know, Mom. I just wanted to make Clara happy. But not at the cost of your health, Thomas. This isn't just about food, it's about control. She can't dictate what you eat to this extent, I said, my voice firm but filled with concern. He looked away, his eyes filling with tears. I love her, Mom. I thought love was about compromises. Compromises, yes. But not like this. Not when it puts you in danger, I replied, squeezing his hand. We sat in silence for a while, the beeping of the heart monitor the only sound in the room. Thomas eventually drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the ordeal. I tried to call Clara, but she didn't answer the phone. Maybe she was afraid of my reaction to what had happened, or maybe she didn't care. After Thomas was discharged from the hospital, I insisted he stay with me for a while. Clara didn't mind. At least she didn't reply to my message. Thomas needed proper care, and I wanted to make sure he got back on his feet, both physically and emotionally. The first evening at my house, I prepared a hearty meal. As I set the table, I could see Thomas eyeing the food with a mix of hunger and hesitation. Mom, this looks amazing, but I don't know if I should. Clara might not like it, Thomas said, a troubled look crossing his face. Thomas, right now, you need to focus on your health. Clara isn't here, and you need to eat, I responded firmly, serving him a generous portion of roasted chicken and vegetables. He reluctantly began to eat, and with each bite, I saw a bit of color return to his cheeks. This is really good, Mom. I didn't realize how much I missed her cooking. I sat across from him, watching him eat. Thomas, you've always been healthy. It's painful to see you like this. Your relationship with Clara, it's not just about food. It's about control and your well-being. Thomas set his fork down, his expression pained. I know, Mom. I just don't know what to do. I love her, but everything is so complicated now. Love shouldn't make you compromise your health or who you are. You've always been considerate and caring, but you can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, I said, hoping my words would resonate with him. Over the next few days, I took care of Thomas, ensuring he ate well and rested. We talked a lot, about everything and nothing. I avoided pressing him about Clara, hoping he would come to his own conclusions. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, Thomas spoke up. Mom, I've been thinking a lot. Maybe I've been trying too hard to please Clara, losing myself in the process. I nodded. It's important to find a balance, Thomas. In a relationship, both people should feel valued and respected. He looked at me, a newfound determination in his eyes. I'm going to talk to Clara. I need to be honest about how I feel, about the diet, and everything else. I reached over, squeezing his hand. Whatever you decide, Thomas, I'm here for you. Just remember, your health and happiness are what's most important. As Thomas went to bed that night, I felt a mix of hope and apprehension. He was at a crossroads, and the next steps he took would shape his future. All I could do was support him and hope that he found the strength to make the right decisions for himself. The situation escalated quickly when Clara, Thomas's wife, burst into my house during lunch. Thomas was just starting to look a bit better after days of proper nutrition at my place. Thomas, what are you doing? Clara shrieked as she saw him eating the chicken broth I'd made. Thomas looked up, startled. Clara, I'm just... You're betraying our lifestyle again. I can't believe this. Clara was livid, her eyes blazing with anger. Before I could intervene, she knocked the bowl of broth from Thomas's hands, sending it crashing to the floor. I stood up, my own anger rising at her irrational behavior. Clara, that's enough. You're in my house, and I won't tolerate this behavior, I said firmly. You're poisoning him, Elaine, with your meat and your old-fashioned ideas. Clara shouted, turning her wrath towards me. Thomas tried to calm her down. Clara, please, let's just talk about this. Ignoring him, Clara pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police. I won't let you harm him any further. Thomas and I exchanged a look of disbelief as Clara dialed. Within minutes, a police car pulled up outside, and 2 officers came to the door. What seems to be the problem here? One of the officers asked, looking between Clara, Thomas, and me. Clara immediately began, pointing a finger at me. She's been forcing my husband to eat meat. She's trying to poison him against his will. The officer turned to me, his expression one of mild confusion and concern. Ma'am, is this true? I shook my head. No, officer. I'm Thomas's mother, and I've been taking care of him. He's been unwell due to malnutrition. I'm a doctor, and I was just trying to help him recover. Thomas spoke up, his voice weak but steady. It's true, officers. I've been staying with my mom for a few days to get my health back. I went to my kitchen counter and picked up a hospital report. Here's the report from when Thomas was admitted after fainting due to low blood sugar. His diet was insufficient, and that's what I've been trying to address. The officers took the report, glancing over it. Clara's face turned pale as the reality of the situation started to dawn on her. Ma'am, it looks like Mrs. Parker has been acting in her son's best interest, the officer said to Clara. If there's no actual harm or criminal activity here, we can't take any action. Clara was speechless, her earlier fury deflated. The officers advised her to resolve the matter peacefully and left. Thomas looked exhausted by the whole ordeal. Clara, I think you should go. We need to talk, but not now. Not like this. Clara, still in shock, quietly left the house without another word. I watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The whole situation had spiraled out of control, and I worried about what this meant for Thomas's future with Clara. In the weeks that followed the police intervention, Thomas stayed with me, slowly regaining his strength and clarity of mind. We had many long conversations about his marriage and future. One evening, as we sat in the living room, a sense of resolve seemed to settle over him. "Mom, I've made a decision," Thomas said, his voice more assertive than I'd heard in a long time. I looked at him, feeling a mix of apprehension and relief. "What have you decided, Thomas?" "I can't go on like this with Clara. Our marriage, it's not healthy. I'm going to file for a divorce," he declared, though I could see the pain in his eyes. I reached out, taking his hand. "I know this must be hard for you, but I think you're making the right choice. You deserve to be happy and healthy, Thomas." He nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "I know. I just wish it didn't have to come to this." The next few days were a whirlwind as Thomas set the divorce process in motion. It was a tough time, but he handled it with a strength that made me proud. When the day came for him to move back into his own place, I helped him pack his things. As he was about to leave, he turned to me. "Mom, I can't thank you enough. You've been my rock through all of this." I hugged him tightly. "You're my son. I'll always be here for you, no matter what." A couple of weeks after Thomas moved out, I received a call from him. He sounded different, more like his old self. "Mom, I wanted to tell you that the divorce has been finalized. And I decided to take legal action against Clara for her role in the accident." I was surprised. "That's a big step, Thomas. Are you sure about this?" "Yes, I am. It's not just about me. It's about setting things right. And, the court ruled in my favor. Clara has to pay me compensation," he explained. I could hear the confidence in his voice. "I'm proud of you, Thomas. You're standing up for yourself." There was a pause before he spoke again. "I've also started seeing a counselor. I think it's helping me understand a lot about myself and my relationships." Hearing this brought a sense of peace to my heart. "That's wonderful, Thomas. Taking care of your mental health is just as important." As we ended the call, I felt a wave of emotions. The past months had been a roller coaster, but through it all, Thomas had found his way back to himself. He had faced his challenges head-on and emerged stronger. The future was uncertain, but I knew that whatever it held, Thomas was now better equipped to face it. And as for me, I would continue to be there for him, his steadfast support, as I had always been. The quaint little gift shop was a hive of activity, its narrow aisles teeming with last-minute shoppers. The air was thick with the scent of scented candles and fresh stationery. I was there too, meandering through the shelves, my eyes skimming over quirky mugs and vintage clocks, searching for a unique keepsake. That's when I noticed him, a lone figure amidst the chaos, looking utterly perplexed and out of his element. He was standing in front of the greeting cards, flipping a card open and then snapping it shut, his brows knitted in concentration. A small, peculiar trinket dangled from his other hand. He seemed to be debating with himself, lost in a world of indecision. I couldn't resist. I took a few steps towards him and said, "Can't make up your mind?" He looked up, slightly startled by the intrusion. His eyes, a deep shade of brown, met mine, and for a moment, he seemed to forget his predicament. "Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm in a bit of a bind here. I'm James," he said, offering a hand. "I'm Anna," I replied, shaking his hand. It was a firm handshake, confident yet inviting. "Nice to meet you, Anna. I'm on a mission to find the perfect birthday gift for my mom, but I seem to be circling around these two," he confessed, holding up the card and the trinket for me to see. The card was bright and colorful, with a humorous quip on the front. The trinket, on the other hand, was a small, intricately designed figurine, delicate and refined. I chuckled. Well, they're quite different. What's your mom like? Maybe I can help you choose. James's face lit up with a grateful smile. That would be amazing, thank you. My mom, she's incredible. She's got this sharp wit but also appreciates the finer things. She's been my rock, you know? As he spoke about his mother, his respect and love for her were palpable. It was touching to see a son speak so fondly of his mother. Well, it sounds like she's a woman of depth. How about we find something that celebrates both her sharp wit and her elegant taste? I suggested. We spent the next few minutes discussing his mother's likes and dislikes, her hobbies, and her style. The more we talked, the more I realized how easy and natural it felt to converse with James. He had a way of making every topic interesting and every joke funnier. Eventually, we settled on a beautiful pendant that was both elegant and quirky. It was a small, silver piece with an intricate design, but the centerpiece was a tiny, whimsical figure that seemed to dance in the light. Anna, you're a lifesaver. I would have been lost in here for hours without your help. How can I thank you? James said, his relief evident. How about you save me from having to cook dinner tonight? I joked, half hoping he'd take the bait. James's eyes twinkled with amusement. Dinner it is. There's this cozy little Italian place I know. How does that sound? It sounds perfect, I replied, my heart skipping a beat. We exchanged numbers and made plans to meet up for dinner. As I left the shop, the pendant securely in James's bag, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. In a sea of mundane days, this chance encounter felt like a breath of fresh air. The evening air was crisp, the kind that hinted at the end of summer and the start of something new. I stood outside James's parents' house, my palms sweaty, rehearsing my greeting. Nice to meet you. I practiced under my breath, trying to sound confident, not realizing that no amount of rehearsal could prepare me for the Carters. James opened the door with that familiar, warm smile. Ready? He asked, sensing my nervousness. As I'll ever be, I replied, trying to muster a smile. We stepped into the living room, and that's when I saw her, Mrs. Carter. She sat regally in her armchair, her cane resting against her leg, her eyes scrutinizing me like a hawk. Mr. Carter sat beside her, a silent, almost invisible presence. Mom, Dad, this is Anna, James introduced. Nice to meet you, I said, extending my hand. Mrs. Carter looked at my hand and then at me, her gaze piercing. Sit, dear, she said, her voice firm, ignoring my hand. We sat, and an uncomfortable silence filled the room. I could feel Mrs. Carter's eyes on me, examining, judging. James seemed oblivious to the tension, or maybe he was just used to it. So, Anna, Mrs. Carter began, her tone casual yet loaded. James tells us you're an accountant. That must be interesting. Yes, it's quite rewarding. I love working with numbers, finding solutions, I replied, trying to sound upbeat. She hummed, unimpressed. And your parents, what do they do? I explained, but with each answer, her questions grew more personal, more probing. It felt less like a conversation and more like an interrogation. James remained silent, his occasional attempts to change the subject quickly overridden by his mother's pointed questions. Tell me, Anna, how much do you earn? Mrs. Carter asked, her tone casual but her intent clear. I was taken aback. It wasn't a question you'd expect in a first meeting, and certainly not in such a straightforward manner. I glanced at James, hoping for some support, but he avoided my gaze. It's a decent amount. It allows me to live comfortably, I answered vaguely, feeling my cheeks flush. I see. And this house of yours, you live there alone? She continued, her curiosity unabashed. It was my grandmother's. I inherited it, I replied, feeling more like I was in a job interview than meeting my boyfriend's parents. Mrs. Carter nodded, her expression unreadable. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of discomfort. Mr. Carter remained silent, his presence almost ghost-like, while Mrs. Carter's questions lingered in the air, sharp and unnerving. As we left, James seemed pleased. "That went well, don't you think?" he said, oblivious to the undercurrents. "Sure," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. As we drove away, the weight of the evening settled on my shoulders. Mrs. Carter's intense scrutiny and pointed questions lingered in my mind, a stark contrast to the warmth and ease I felt with James. James and I, we were in love, sure, but marriage wasn't on my immediate bingo card. Yet, there we were, standing in my living room, the same one I grew up in, talking about forever. "Anna, I know it's soon, but I feel it, you know?" "Why wait?" James said, his eyes full of that earnestness that first drew me to him. I hesitated, the image of Mrs. Carter's scrutinizing gaze flashing in my mind. "James, your mom, that dinner was intense. Are you sure we're ready for this step?" He took my hands in his, a comforting warmth spreading through me. "Anna, I love you. And yeah, my mom can be a bit much, but don't worry, we'll handle it together. You and me, okay?" His words were a balm, soothing away the doubts. "Okay," I whispered, the word a leap of faith. We decided on a simple ceremony. No grand gestures, no elaborate fanfare, just an intimate gathering of close friends and family. It felt right, true to who we were. But as the day approached, the butterflies in my stomach weren't just from bridal jitters. The wedding was beautiful, a small affair in my backyard. The same trees that witnessed my childhood games now stood witness to my vows. But amidst the joy, there was an undercurrent of tension, an unspoken question hanging in the air: how would the Carters fit into this new picture we were painting? James sensed it, I could tell. As we danced, his hand on my waist, mine on his shoulder, he leaned in. "Don't worry, love. We'll make it work. You, me, and yes, even my parents." I smiled, a mix of hope and apprehension. "Promise?" "Promise," he affirmed, sealing it with a kiss. But promises, I'd learn, are fragile things. The reality hit home when James and I moved into my grandmother's house. It was a quaint place, its walls holding memories of a lifetime. The ramps and low steps, once installed for my grandmother's convenience, now stood as silent testaments to her struggles and strength. "Your grandma had it all figured out, huh?" James remarked one evening, his gaze trailing over the seamless design. "Yeah, she did. She wanted to be independent, no matter what," I said, a hint of pride in my voice. It wasn't long before Mrs. Carter came to visit. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, took in every detail of the house. The way she moved, slowly, deliberately, her cane tapping against the floor, it was like she was marking her territory. "This is a nice place, Anna. Very accommodating," she commented, her voice laced with something I couldn't quite place. I forced a smile. "Thanks, Mrs. Carter. We like it." But her next words sent a chill down my spine. "It's difficult, you know, living in a place that doesn't understand your needs. I think I'd be better off here." The statement hung in the air, a silent ultimatum. James, ever the peacemaker, tried to navigate the treacherous waters. "Mom, we can discuss this later. Let's not jump into decisions." But the decision, it seemed, was already made. In her mind, Mrs. Carter had found her new abode. And as I looked into James's eyes, searching for the reassurance I so desperately needed, I realized that our swift marriage was about to face its first real test. The day the Carters moved in, the house changed. It wasn't just the extra shoes by the door or the additional toothbrushes in the bathroom. It was like the air itself shifted, dense with the weight of their presence. I was in the kitchen, trying to make sense of the chaos that had become my pantry, when Mrs. Carter hobbled in. Her cane clicked against the floor, a sound that was quickly becoming the soundtrack of my life. "Anna, dear, I was thinking," she started, her voice cutting through the silence. "This shelf is too high. I can't reach anything. You should rearrange it." I bit my lip, holding back a sigh. "Sure, Mrs. Carter. I'll take care of it. And another thing," she continued, oblivious to my growing frustration, "Mark and I should take the bedroom downstairs. It's just too much for me to climb up and down." "But that's our bedroom," I protested weakly, the reality of the situation sinking in. She gave me a look, one that said my comfort was secondary. "Well, it's just practical, dear. You're young, you can manage." Before I could respond, Mr. Carter entered, his presence like a shadow, always there, but never quite tangible. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Just discussing some adjustments," Mrs. Carter replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. As they left, I felt a surge of resentment. My home, my sanctuary, was being dismantled, piece by piece, and I was expected to smile and nod. The days that followed were a blur of demands and critiques. Mrs. Carter had an opinion on everything: how the furniture should be arranged, what meals should be cooked, how the house should be cleaned. And every evening, James would come home to a battlefield, his attempts to mediate often ending in heated arguments. "Anna, we need to be understanding. They're adjusting," he'd say, trying to calm the storm. "Adjusting? James, they're not adjusting, they're invading. This is our home, not a hotel for your parents," I'd retort, my patience wearing thin. But the breaking point came one evening, over dinner. Mrs. Carter had made some offhand comment about the meal, how it wasn't to her liking. Something inside me snapped. "Mrs. Carter, I understand you're used to things a certain way, but this is my home too. I'm doing my best here," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. She looked at me, her eyes cold and unyielding. "Your best isn't good enough, dear. Maybe if you spent less time at that job of yours, and more time here, things would be different." I looked at James, desperate for support, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on his plate. In that moment, I realized the gravity of the situation. I was an outsider in my own home, my life hijacked by the unwelcome presence of the Carters. The tension in the house was like a thick fog, impossible to ignore. Every morning, I woke up to the same routine: prepare breakfast for 4, rush to work, then come back to a list of complaints and demands. It was like living with a ticking bomb, never knowing when the next explosion would be. One evening, I was in the kitchen, trying to juggle preparing dinner and responding to a flurry of work emails when Mrs. Carter came in, her cane tapping a steady, irritating beat on the floor. "Anna, this kitchen is a mess. And what's for dinner? I hope it's not that bland chicken dish you made last week," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to snap back. "I'm doing the best I can, Mrs. Carter. And it's pasta tonight." She sniffed, making it clear what she thought of my best. "You know, if you weren't so tied up with that job of yours, maybe you'd manage the house better." That was it. The final straw. I turned to face her, my hands trembling with frustration. "Mrs. Carter, I'm working this job to support us. And I'm also trying to manage the house. I'm only one person. I can't do everything." Her eyes narrowed. "Well, maybe you should consider working from home then. That way, you can keep an eye on the house and still do your job." I was flabbergasted. Work from home? Just so I could clean up after them and cook on demand? The thought was suffocating. "James and I have been talking, and we think it's the best solution," she continued, as if reading from a script. I felt a surge of anger. "You've been talking? And what about me? Don't I get a say in this?" Just then, James walked in, and I turned to him, hoping for some support. "James, please tell me you don't agree with this." He looked uncomfortable, caught between his mother and his wife. "Anna, it's just... Mom has a point. It would make things easier." "Easier? For whom?" "Certainly not for me." I felt like I was drowning, and the people who were supposed to throw me a lifeline were instead pushing me further under. "James, this is not about making things easier. It's about respect and boundaries. Your parents moved into my house, and now they're trying to dictate how I live and work. This is not okay," I said, my voice rising with every word. Mrs. Carter interjected, her tone patronizing. "Anna, dear, we're family now. We should be helping each other, not arguing over trivial things." Trivial things? My job, my independence, my sanity, were these trivial things? I looked at James, searching his eyes for the man I married, the man who promised to stand by me. But all I saw was indecision, a man torn between his wife and his mother. Under the relentless pressure from Mrs. Carter and the passive compliance of James, I found myself boxed into a corner with no escape. The air in the house was thick with my silent acquiescence as I reluctantly agreed to work from home. Each day melted into the next, a monotonous blend of keystrokes, cooking, and cleaning, all under the watchful, often disapproving, gaze of Mrs. Carter. James, for his part, seemed blind to the imbalance, content to let the scales tip ever in favor of his parents. Then came that fateful evening, the one where the weight of my silence became too heavy to bear. We were gathered around the dinner table, the air heavy with the scent of the meal I had spent hours preparing. Mrs. Carter was mid-complaint about the seasoning of the chicken when I finally found my voice. "I'm tired," I said, the words falling from my lips like heavy stones. "I'm tired of trying to balance work and taking care of everyone's needs. Maybe it's time we considered living separately." The words hung in the air, a fragile bubble of hope destined to burst. Mrs. Carter paused, her fork mid-air, her eyes locking with mine. Then, to my utter disbelief, she nodded. "I agree," she said, her voice smooth as silk, her tone matter of fact. "This arrangement isn't ideal. But this house, it's so well equipped for our needs. So, Anna, it would make sense for you to find another place." The room spun, her words a gut punch that knocked the air from my lungs. I turned to James, desperate for him to intervene, to stand up for us, for our home. But the man I looked to for support merely echoed his mother's sentiment. "Mom's right, Anna. This house suits their needs. You can leave here if you like," he said, his words slicing through the last tether of my restraint. His words, so casually delivered, were the culmination of 1,000 tiny betrayals. The man I loved, the man I had built a life with, was offering up my sanctuary, my grandmother's legacy, on a silver platter to appease his parents. Without a word, I pushed my chair back and stood up. The legs of the chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp and final. I could feel their eyes on me, wide with surprise, as I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had looked up just moments ago, my fingers steady, my resolve unwavering. The room was silent except for the muffled voice on the other end of the phone. "Yes, I need to schedule a move," I said, my voice clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. A look of triumph flickered across Mrs. Carter's face, a smug smile curling her lips as she mistook my actions. She thought I was conceding, retreating from my own home. But the reality of my words hadn't hit her yet. I turned to face her, my eyes locking with hers. "Mrs. Carter, you seem to be misunderstanding the situation. The movers aren't for me. They're for you, your husband, and James. You have until the end of the day to pack your things and leave my house." The silence that followed was profound, the words hanging in the air like a verdict. Mrs. Carter's face drained of color, her triumphant smile faltering, transforming into a mask of disbelief and shock. But this is our home now. You can't just throw us out." she stammered, her voice trembling with a mix of outrage and fear. This was never your home. You imposed yourselves, and your son allowed it. But I'm reclaiming what's rightfully mine, I replied, my voice unwavering. James was on his feet now, his face a mixture of confusion and desperation. Anna, please, let's talk about this. You don't need to do this. We're a family. The word family hit me like a slap in the face. This was not how family treated each other. This was not how love manifested. James, a family respects each other. A family supports each other. What happened here was manipulation and disrespect. I'll have the divorce papers sent to you tomorrow, I said, the finality of my words sealing the fate of our marriage. Mrs. Carter started to cry, her sobs a cacophony of disbelief and loss. James tried to plead, his words a jumbled mess of apologies and promises. But it was too late. The decision had been made, the line drawn. The day after the movers had cleared out the last of the Carters' belongings, I stood in the middle of my living room. The sun streamed through the windows, its light touching every corner, every surface, as if to cleanse the space of the heavy shadows of the past months. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the constant noise and tension that had become my daily reality. I wandered from room to room, each step feeling lighter than the last. The house was mine again, my sanctuary, my refuge. I could breathe, truly breathe, without the weight of their expectations suffocating me. It was in this moment of solitude that the doorbell rang, a gentle chime that seemed too loud in the quiet of the house. I opened the door to find my friend Sarah standing there, a warm smile on her face and a casserole dish in her hands. "Heard you might need some company and comfort food," she said, stepping inside. We made our way to the kitchen, the aroma of the casserole filling the space, a scent of normalcy, of home. As we sat down at the table, Sarah reached for my hand, her touch grounding. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. I took a deep breath, the future a blank canvas before me. Now, I start over. I rebuild, on my terms. It's daunting, sure, but also liberating. Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding and support. You know, sometimes the best beginnings come from the hardest endings. You've got this, Anna. You're stronger than you think. Her words resonated, a gentle reminder of the resilience that had carried me through the storm. I guess it's time to find out what I'm really made of, I said, a tentative smile on my lips. The conversation flowed, the comfort of old friendship wrapping around me like a warm blanket. We talked about everything and nothing, the laughter and chatter a balm to my weary soul. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I realized that this was more than just a new beginning. It was a chance to rediscover myself, to redefine my boundaries, to live my life unapologetically.